The Memphis Belle baggage tug rumbled beneath Andrew Hoskins as he guided it through the maintenance lane at Hartsfield-Jackson, diesel exhaust mixing with the jet fuel tang that had become his cologne after 12 years on the tarmac. 6:40 a.m., and the morning rush was building, Delta flights stacking up at Terminal South like dominoes waiting to fall. Andrew keyed his radio, calling out to dispatch that Tug 47 was rolling to Gate D17, and settled into the rhythm that had defined his adult life. Hook, load, deliver, repeat. At 38, Andrew had mastered the invisible choreography of America's busiest airport. He knew which pilots taxied aggressive and which gave you room to work. He understood the weight distribution on a 737 versus an A320, could back a fully loaded baggage cart into a 2-inch gap without scraping paint. His hands bore the scars of 12 years. Burn marks from hot exhaust pipes, a crooked left pinky that had healed wrong after getting pinched between carts, calluses thick as leather from wrestling cargo nets in Georgia. Heat. Hoskins, you copy. The radio crackled with DeMarco's voice, his supervisor riding everyone hard this morning. Copy D, what's up? Need you to swing by the freight hangar after D17. Got a priority cooler came in on the red eye from DCCDC tags all over it. They want it moved to the secure hold ASAP. Andrew's jaw tightened. CDC shipments meant biohazard protocols, which meant paperwork, which meant he'd be behind schedule before breakfast. Roger that. 15 minutes. The tug bounced over expansion joints in the concrete, and Andrew's mind drifted to the news he'd caught during his coffee this morning. Something about a security incident at the CDC's main facility 3 miles north, police helicopters circling Clifton Road at 4 a.m. Mom had texted him twice already, asking if he'd heard anything, if he thought it was serious. Gene Hoskins didn't spook easy. 63 years in Atlanta had weathered her through riots, Olympic bombings, and the I-85 bridge collapse, but something in her messages carried an edge. Probably nothing, Andrew thought, guiding the tug past a line of catering trucks. Government facilities get scares all the time. Probably some grad student knocked over a beaker, but his hand drifted to his phone anyway, checking for new messages. Nothing since Mom's 6:15 text. Call me when you get a chance, baby, love you. At Gate D17, Andrew hooked up to 3 baggage carts. 280 pounds of suitcases, golf clubs, and the random bullshit people thought they needed in Orlando. Marcus was working the belt loader, feeding bags up to the hold, like he'd been doing it since Carter was president. The old man caught Andrew's eye and shook his head. You see the news? Marcus asked, his voice gravelly from 40 years of Pall Malls. CDC thing? Yeah. They saying it's contained, but I don't know, man. My nephew works security over at Emory Hospital. He texted me at 5 this morning, said they had 3 ambulances screaming into the ER, people in hazmat suits running around like their asses were on fire. Andrew felt something cold settle in his stomach. Probably just precautions. Maybe. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead with an oil-stained rag. But they shut down Clifton Road completely. No traffic in or out. That ain't standard procedure. Hoskins! DeMarco's voice barked through the radio again. Where you at with that CDC cooler? On my way now, Andrew responded, unhooking from the baggage train at D17. He caught Marcus's eye one more time. Stay safe, old man. You too, young blood. The freight hangar sat on the south side of the airfield, a corrugated metal cavern that smelled like cardboard and diesel. Andrew navigated the tug through the morning shadows, past pallets of Amazon packages and crates of perishable goods waiting for their connections. 3 other tugs were parked near the loading dock, their drivers clustered around a tablet, faces tight with whatever they were watching. What's going on? Andrew asked, killing his engine. Jerome, a stocky guy from night shift who should have been off hours ago, looked up. You need to see this, man. The tablet showed a cell phone video. shaky footage of what looked like the CDC campus from across the street. Smoke poured from one of the buildings, and figures in hazmat suits were running. But it was the audio that made Andrew's blood ice over, screaming, not from people being hurt, but from people being terrified. And underneath it, a sound he couldn't quite place. Wet, hungry, wrong. "That's from 30 minutes ago," Jerome said. "My girl's cousin lives in Druid Hills. She said the whole neighborhood's going crazy, police everywhere, telling people to stay inside." "They're calling it an outbreak," added Shanice, who worked freight dispatch. Her hands were shaking as she scrolled through news alerts. "Level 4 biohazard breach, some kind of hemorrhagic virus. They're saying people are attacking each other." Andrew's phone buzzed. Mom again. "Andrew, please call me. They're saying don't go outside. I'm scared." "Fuck," he breathed, dialing her number. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. "Fuck." "Phone lines are probably jammed," Shanice said, but her voice held no conviction. "Where's this cooler I'm supposed to move?" Andrew asked, his training overriding his rising panic. "Keep moving, stay focused, one task at a time." Jerome pointed to the far corner of the hangar. "Over there, but man, maybe we should—" Andrew was already walking. The cooler sat on a metal pallet, roughly the size of a mini fridge, covered in biohazard warnings and CDC custody seals. According to the manifest taped to its side, it had originated from the National Biodefense Analysis and Countermeasures Center in Maryland, routed through D.C., destination Atlanta, for Project Obsidian Gate. Whatever the hell that meant. The cooler's seal looked intact, but Andrew noticed condensation beading on the outside. That was wrong. These things were insulated precisely to prevent temperature changes. He crouched down, examining the unit more carefully. One corner of the housing showed damage, a crack in the polymer casing barely wider than a pencil lead, but definitely there. "Jerome, come look at this." But Jerome wasn't listening. None of them were. They'd all turned toward the hangar's main entrance, where the morning light had been suddenly blocked by a figure stumbling through the doorway. It was Ray Tomlinson, one of the ground crew leads, still wearing his reflective vest and radio headset. But something was catastrophically wrong with Ray. His shirt was torn open, revealing deep gashes across his chest that wept dark blood. His eyes were wrong, pupils dilated so wide they looked black, with bloodshot whites that seemed to pulse. And his mouth was opening and closing in a rhythm that had nothing to do with breathing, teeth clicking together with mechanical precision. "Ray," Shanice called out. "Ray, what happened? Do you need—" Ray's head snapped toward her voice with predatory speed. A sound came from his throat that was half growl, half gargle, and then he was moving. Not running, not stumbling, charging. Shanice screamed. Jerome grabbed her arm and yanked her back as Ray crossed the hangar floor with terrifying speed. His legs moved in a jerky, broken gait, but he covered ground fast. And that sound, that wet, hungry sound from the video, was pouring from his open mouth. Andrew's body moved before his brain caught up. 12 years of working around heavy machinery had taught him to respect momentum and leverage. He grabbed a luggage cart handle and swung it hard, catching Ray in the knees. The impact sent Ray sprawling, but he was up again in seconds. That same mechanical precision, no pain response, no hesitation. "Run!" Andrew shouted. "Everybody out!" They scattered like birds. Jerome and Shanice bolted for the side exit. The other drivers dove for their tugs. Andrew backed toward his own vehicle, keeping the luggage cart between himself and Ray, who was advancing again with that horrible clicking mouth. Andrew's hand found the tug's controls. He slammed it into reverse and gunned the engine. The tug jerked backward, and Andrew spun it 90 degrees, putting the vehicle's bulk between him and Ray. But Ray wasn't alone anymore. 2 more figures stumbled through the hangar entrance, a woman in a business suit with her throat torn open, and a TSA agent whose uniform was soaked in blood. Both had those same black, dilated eyes. Both made that same hungry sound. "Jesus Christ," Andrew whispered. His hands found his radio. "Dispatch, this is Hoskins. We have a situation at the freight hangar. Multiple injuries. They're attacking. We need—" Static answered him. Then screaming. Then nothing. Andrew's mind raced through options. The side exit was blocked now by the woman and the TSA agent. The main entrance had Ray. The cooler sat 20 feet away, still leaking condensation, still damaged. And somewhere in Atlanta, Mom was home alone in Buckhead, probably watching the news, probably terrified. Get to the tug, and drive. But Ray lunged at him, crossing the distance impossibly fast. Andrew grabbed a tow bar from the equipment rack, 5 feet of solid steel used for pushing aircraft, and swung it like a baseball bat. It connected with Ray's skull with a sound like a watermelon splitting. Ray went down hard, blood pooling on the concrete. For 3 seconds, Andrew stood there, tow bar shaking in his hands, staring at what he'd just done to a man he'd known for 6 years, a man who'd brought his famous barbecue to the company picnic every summer. Then Ray started getting up again. Not getting up like a person, getting up like an insect, limbs bending at wrong angles, head lolling with pieces of skull visible through the wound, but getting up. "No," Andrew breathed. "No, no, no." He ran, grabbed his tug steering wheel and hit the ignition, not bothering with the baggage cart still attached. The tug roared to life, and Andrew floored it, dragging the cart behind him as he aimed for the hangar's main door. The woman in the business suit lunged for him as he passed. Her fingers caught the side mirror and tore it clean off, but Andrew was already outside, accelerating across the tarmac. Behind him, the hangar erupted in chaos, more screaming, metal crashing, that horrible wet sound multiplying. Andrew drove blind for 30 seconds, hands locked on the wheel, breath coming in gasps. When he finally looked up, he saw the tarmac stretching before him, and beyond it, the city of Atlanta rising into the morning haze. Smoke was visible now, multiple columns rising from different parts of the city. And something else, helicopters, military choppers, more than he'd ever seen outside of presidential visits, circling the downtown area like wasps. His radio crackled. "All personnel evacuate terminals immediately." Static. "Containment has failed." More static. "Not a drill." Andrew pulled the tug to a stop near Gate C-22, trying to process what he'd just seen. Ray Tomlinson had died. Andrew had caved in his skull with a tow bar. He'd seen the damage. But Ray had gotten back up. Not possible. Not fucking possible. But it had happened. And if Ray could get back up, then the woman could get back up, and the TSA agent, and anyone else who got bitten, infected, whatever this was, Mom. Andrew grabbed his phone and tried calling again, straight to voicemail. He tried texting, "Mom, I'm coming. Stay inside, lock all doors. Don't let anyone in. I'm coming." He needed a plan. The airport was compromised. That much was obvious from the radio chatter still crackling through abandoned channels. The city was compromised. Those smoke columns told that story. But Mom's house in Buckhead was 7 miles north, a straight shot up 85 if the interstate was clear. If. Andrew looked at his tug, a glorified tractor designed to pull baggage carts at 15 miles per hour. Not exactly a getaway vehicle. But the airport had other options. Vehicles designed for long hauls across the tarmac. Vehicles that could handle rough terrain. The maintenance garage sat on the north side of the airport complex. Near the cargo facilities, Andrew knew they kept 6 heavy-duty trucks there. F-350s with reinforced suspension, used for towing aircraft and moving ground support equipment. Those trucks could handle anything. He put the tug in gear and started driving, scanning the tarmac for threats. In the distance, he could see people running between terminals, some in ground crew uniforms, some in business suits. Some ran with purpose, heading for the parking decks. Others ran in circles, panicked. And some didn't run at all. They moved with that same jerky, mechanical gait he'd seen in Ray, hunting the people who were fleeing. An announcement blared from the terminal speakers. "All passengers and personnel evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. All passengers and personnel—" The voice cut off mid-sentence, replaced by a scream that went on for 5 seconds before ending abruptly. Andrew drove faster, weaving between abandoned baggage carts and fuel trucks. Near gate B14, he passed a ground service vehicle on its side, smoke pouring from its engine. Bodies lay scattered around it. He couldn't tell if they were dead or about to get up again. "Don't look. Keep moving." The maintenance garage came into view, a sprawling building with a dozen bay doors. Andrew abandoned the tug 50 yards out and approached on foot, carrying the tow bar. The sound of his own breathing seemed deafening in the sudden quiet. Bay 3 was open, and inside he could see the F-350s lined up like cavalry horses. Andrew moved quickly, checking the first truck's cab. Keys in the ignition. Thank God for lazy protocols. He climbed in, started the engine, and felt the V8 rumble to life under him. "Now we're talking." He backed out of the bay and turned north toward the perimeter road. If he could reach the employee exit on Sullivan Road, he could get onto 85 and make a run for Buckhead 15 minutes if traffic was light. 20 if he had to navigate wrecks. The radio in the truck suddenly came alive. "Obsidian Gate is compromised. All military personnel fall back to Rally Point Echo. Civilian authorities have lost control. Recommend immediate deployment of National Guard." "Obsidian Gate," Andrew muttered. The same words that had been on the cooler manifest. Not just a CDC accident then. Something deliberate. Something planned that had gone catastrophically wrong. He reached the perimeter road and found chaos. Cars were abandoned at odd angles, doors open, engines still running. A Delta shuttle bus had crashed through the fence, its front end crumpled against a light pole. Through the bus windows, Andrew could see movement, figures that might have been passengers once, now pressing against the glass with bloody hands. Andrew navigated around the wreckage, keeping his speed up. The employee exit gate stood open, its security booth abandoned. Beyond it, Sullivan Road stretched toward the interstate, and Andrew could see a river of red taillights. Traffic fleeing the city in one direction, nothing coming the other way. Everyone's trying to leave. Smart. But Andrew was trying to go in. He turned left onto Sullivan, accelerating past abandoned cars on the shoulder. At the I-85 interchange, he faced his first major decision: south toward downtown and the core of the outbreak, or north toward Buckhead and Mom North. Always north. The on-ramp was clear, and Andrew merged onto 85 north with the engine roaring. The highway stretched before him in 3 lanes of chaos, cars everywhere, some still moving, most abandoned. He wove between them, using the truck's bulk to push smaller vehicles aside when necessary. His eyes constantly scanned for threats, the infected desperate people, accidents waiting to happen. Near exit 248, he passed a cluster of cars surrounding an overturned tanker truck. Flames licked from its ruptured hull, and the heat was intense even from the highway bodies moved in the wreckage, whether living or infected. Andrew couldn't tell and didn't slow down to find out. His phone buzzed. A text from Mom. "Can't talk, people outside trying to get in. I hear them in the hallway. I'm scared baby Andrew's foot pressed harder on the accelerator." The truck hit 70, 80, 90 exit signs blurred past. Lindbergh, Peachtree, Piedmont, each one showing more evidence of collapse. Fires, wrecks, abandoned police cars. At exit 252, Andrew saw a National Guard checkpoint blocking all lanes. Humvees were positioned across the highway, soldiers in full combat gear manning M240 machine guns. A sergeant was waving vehicles to stop, but Andrew could see bodies piled behind the checkpoint, not sick people, not infected, just people who'd tried to run the roadblock. He hit the brakes hard, bringing the F-350 to a stop 50 yards out. The sergeant approached with his rifle up, finger off the trigger, but ready. "Sir, this checkpoint is closed. You need to turn around and seek shelter." "My mother's in Buckhead," Andrew said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm airport ground crew. I know what's happening. I need to get to her." "Buckhead's been evacuated," the sergeant said. His face was young, maybe 23, but his eyes looked ancient. "You can't go in there." "Evacuated where?" "Rally Point Zulu, Dobbins Air Reserve Base." "Did she make it?" "Jean Hoskins, Willow Creek Drive, number 2847. The sergeant shook his head. "I don't have that information, but sir, I'm telling you, Buckhead is hot. We've got multiple reports of infected throughout the neighborhood. The quarantine failed. If your mother's still there—" He trailed off. Andrew's hands tightened on the wheel. "I'm going anyway." "Sir, I can't let you. You gonna shoot me?" Andrew met the young sergeant's eyes. "Because that's the only way you're stopping me." The sergeant stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned and waved to the Humvees. "Let him through. Stupid son of a bitch wants to die. That's on him." The roadblock parted, and Andrew drove through into what the military had designated as the hot zone beyond the checkpoint. Atlanta looked like footage from a war zone. Smoke rose from dozens of buildings. Wrecked cars littered the streets and bodies. So many bodies, some lying still, others dragging themselves forward with broken limbs. Andrew took exit 254 onto Lenox Road, heading into Buckhead proper. The neighborhoods here were upscale, condos, boutiques, restaurants where a steak cost $50. Now they were burning. A Whole Foods had been looted, its windows smashed, shopping carts scattered across the parking lot. Bodies lay among them. He navigated through side streets, avoiding the main roads where the infected seemed to cluster. Their behavior was becoming clearer with each glimpse. They were attracted to sound and movement, working together without communication, tireless. He saw a small group of them bring down a man running for his car, swarming him like ants on a beetle. Willow Creek Drive appeared ahead, a quiet residential street lined with oak trees and brick townhouses. Andrew counted down the numbers. 2835, 2839, 2843, 2847. Mum's townhouse sat back from the street, its windows dark. Andrew parked the truck in the driveway, killed the engine, and grabbed the tow bar. The front door was intact, but scratched, like something had been clawing at it. Andrew knocked softly. "Mom, it's Andrew. Open up." Silence. He knocked again, harder. "Mom, it's me. Please." A shadow moved behind the door's peephole. Then locks clicked. 3 of them. Mom had always been careful about security, and the door cracked open. Jean Hoskins looked like she'd aged 10 years. Her grey hair was disheveled, her face pale, her hands shaking as she reached for her son. "Andrew, oh God, Andrew." They hugged for 3 seconds. Then Andrew pulled her inside and locked the door behind them. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine now." She clutched his arms like he might disappear. "I heard them in the hallway earlier. Mrs. Chen from 2851. She was screaming, Andrew. She was screaming, and then she just stopped, and then I heard her walking again, but it didn't sound right." Andrew moved to the window and peered through the blinds. The street looked empty, but he knew that could change instantly. "We need to leave. I've got a truck outside. We're going to head for Dobbins Air Base. The military's setting up evacuation centers." "What about your Aunt Linda and your cousin Marcus? They live—" "Mom, we don't have time. We need to go now before it gets dark." Jean nodded, understanding in her eyes that her son was right, that the world had shifted into something where normal considerations no longer applied. She grabbed her purse and a jacket, then stopped. Wait, I need to get Dad's gun." Andrew had forgotten about the revolver. A .38 special that his father had bought 20 years ago, barely ever fired. Mom retrieved it from her bedroom closet, along with a box of ammunition. Andrew checked the cylinder. 6 rounds. Not much, but better than nothing. They were at the front door when they heard it. Footsteps on the stairs outside, multiple sets, moving with that jerky, mechanical rhythm. Andrew looked through the peephole and saw 3 infected ascending the staircase, 2 women and a man, all bearing wounds that should have killed them, all moving with single-minded purpose toward 2847. "Back door," Andrew whispered. They moved through the townhouse quickly, Mom leading since she knew the layout in the dark, through the kitchen, past the breakfast nook where Andrew had eaten cereal before school for 18 years, to the sliding glass door that opened onto a small patio. The patio overlooked a narrow alley that ran behind the townhouse complex. Andrew slid the door open as quietly as possible and helped Mom through. They could hear the infected at the front door now, pounding, scratching, making those horrible wet sounds. "Down the alley," Andrew said, fast but quiet. They moved between brick walls and chain-link fences, stepping over trash bags and recycling bins behind them, the sound of splintering wood, the front door giving way. The infected would be inside now, searching, and when they found nothing, they'd expand their search. Andrew guided Mom toward where the alley met Peachtree Road. The F-350 was on the opposite side of the townhouse complex, but going back for it was suicide now. They needed another option. Peachtree Road was a main artery through Buckhead, normally choked with traffic. Now, it was a graveyard of cars. Andrew scanned the vehicles, looking for something that would work. Most had their doors open, keys missing, but midway down the block, he spotted a Jeep Wrangler with its top on, parked at an angle like the driver had bailed in a hurry. The driver's door was closed. "There," he said, pointing. They crossed Peachtree at a run, zigzagging between abandoned cars. Andrew reached the Jeep and tried the door. Locked. He smashed the window with his elbow, ignoring the pain, and reached inside to unlock it. No keys in the ignition. "Fuck!" he hissed, checking the sun visor under the seat, the center console, nothing. "Andrew." Mom's voice was tight. She was looking back toward the townhouses. 3 infected had emerged from the alley. They'd spotted Andrew and Mom, and they were coming. That same tireless charge, mouths opening and closing. Andrew made a decision he'd regret later. He aimed the .38 at the Jeep's steering column and fired. The shot was deafening in the urban canyon of buildings, and the steering column exploded in plastic shards. Andrew yanked the cover away, exposing the ignition mechanism. 12 years of watching airport mechanics had taught him the basics of hot wiring. Modern cars were harder, but Wranglers were old-school simple. He found the battery and ignition wires, stripped them with his teeth, and twisted them together. The Jeep's electrical system came alive. Then he found the starter wire. The infected were 30 feet away. He touched the starter wire to the battery wire. The engine turned over once, twice, 20 feet. The engine caught and roared to life. Andrew threw himself into the driver's seat and reached across to open the passenger door. "Get in!" Mom dove in as Andrew slammed his door. The lead infected, a woman whose jaw hung at an unnatural angle, crashed into the driver's side window, cracking the glass. Her fingers scrabbled at the window frame, trying to find purchase. Andrew shifted into drive and floored it. The Jeep lurched forward, throwing the infected off. Andrew didn't look back, just drove, weaving between wrecked cars and debris. The steering wheel shook in his hands. He'd damaged something when he shot the column, but the Jeep was running, and that was all that mattered. "Where are we going?" Mom asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "Dobbins Air Base. It's northwest, maybe 20 miles if we can find a clear route." But as Andrew turned onto Roswell Road, heading northwest, he saw the first signs that reaching Dobbins wouldn't be simple. A massive pile-up blocked all lanes, dozens of cars crumpled together, flames and smoke mixing into a dark wall. Bodies moved between the wreckage, some trying to escape, others hunting them. "Can we go around?" Mom asked. Andrew studied the side streets. All of them looked like war zones. He needed to think like an airport guy. Find the service routes, the paths that bypassed the main thoroughfares. Hold on. He swung the jeep hard right onto a residential street that paralleled Roswell. The houses here were intact but dark, curtains drawn. No signs of life. Smart people were hiding, waiting for help that might never come. Stupid people were on the streets, running, fighting, dying. Andrew hoped he and Mom fell somewhere in between 3 blocks down. The residential street connected to a service road that ran behind a shopping center. Andrew followed it, passing dumpsters and loading docks. Near the back entrance to a Target, he saw a man frantically loading supplies into a minivan. Bottled water, canned goods, batteries. The man saw the jeep and immediately raised a shotgun. Andrew hit the brakes and raised his hands. "Easy! We're not here for your stuff!" The man kept the shotgun trained on them. "Get out of here. This is mine." "We're leaving. We're just trying to get to Dobbins." "Dobbins?" The man laughed, a sound that held no humor. "Dobbins is overrun. Happened 2 hours ago. Refugees from the city showed up by the thousands. Some of them were already infected. The whole base went to hell." Andrew felt his stomach drop. "What, are you sure?" "Positive. My brother's Air Force, stationed there. He texted me before the cell towers went down. Said they'd lost containment, that the infected were inside the fence. He told me to run and not stop." The man lowered the shotgun slightly. "If you're smart, you'll find someplace isolated and dig in. Cities are death traps now." "Where are you going?" Mom asked. "North. My family's got a cabin in the mountains near Dahlonega. It's 60 miles, but if I can get there—" He trailed off, then seemed to make a decision. "Look, I don't know you, but you seem decent. Take Highway 400 north. Avoid the main interstates. They're clogged with people trying to evacuate. Stick to back roads. And if you find water and supplies, take them. Don't wait. Don't ask permission. Just take them. It's survival now." Andrew nodded. "Good luck." "You too." The man finished loading his minivan and drove off, heading north at high speed. Mom looked at Andrew. "Do we follow him?" "No, he's right about the cities, but running to the mountains with no supplies is just dying slowly." Andrew's mind was racing, running through options. "We need to find a secure location. Somewhere we can fortify, stockpile supplies, wait this out. Wait it out! Andrew, this is a virus. They'll find a cure. The government will—" "Mom," Andrew's voice was gentle but firm. "You saw what happened to Ray. I hit him in the head with a metal bar hard enough to crack his skull. He got back up. These aren't sick people, they're—" He struggled for the word. "There's something else. And the government lost control. That's what the military guy told me. Containment failed." Jean Hoskins looked at her son, seeing in his face the same determination that his father had shown, the stubbornness that had built a good life through hard work and careful planning. "Okay," she said quietly. "So where do we go?" Andrew thought about it. They needed somewhere with multiple exits, good sight lines and access to resources, somewhere that wouldn't attract large groups of desperate people but would have useful supplies. An idea formed, born from 12 years of watching the flow of goods through Atlanta's airport. "The warehouse district in Chambly," he said. "Industrial area, mostly commercial buildings. There's a food distribution warehouse, I know. We had a contract with them at the airport 3-story building. Loading docks, chain-link fence around the perimeter. It'll have supplies, and it's the kind of place people won't think to raid immediately." "You think it'll be empty?" "I think it's our best shot." Andrew turned the jeep north, navigating through side streets toward Chambly. The afternoon sun was sinking toward evening, and with the darkness would come worse things. The infected seemed mindless, but he'd noticed they moved more confidently in shadows. Evolutionary advantage, maybe. Whatever had created them had optimized for hunting. They passed through neighborhoods that looked increasingly abandoned. Here and there, Andrew saw signs of resistance, houses with fortified windows, cars parked to block driveways. One place with a hand-painted sign that read, "We are armed, we will shoot." Good intentions, but he wondered how long those people would last when the infected came in numbers. Near the Chambly border, they encountered their first major obstacle, a group of survivors blocking the road with cars and debris. About a dozen people, armed with hunting rifles and baseball bats, standing behind their makeshift barricade. A hand-painted sign read, "Turn back. Road closed." Andrew stopped the jeep 30 yards out. A man in his 50s, wearing a Braves cap and carrying an AR-15, stepped forward. "Road's closed," he called out. "You'll need to turn around." "We're just trying to pass through," Andrew said, keeping his hands visible. "We're not infected. We're not looking for trouble." "Don't care. We got families to protect. Can't have strangers bringing problems into our neighborhood." Andrew understood the logic. Trust no one. Protect your own. But it didn't solve his problem. "There's got to be another way through." "Yeah, around. Take Peachtree Industrial. Head west. Go around our zone." Andrew calculated in his head. The detour would add miles and time, and night was coming, but trying to force through would just get them shot. "Okay, thanks." He turned the jeep around and headed for the detour. Mom was quiet beside him, processing everything. Finally, she spoke. "Those people, they're probably going to die, aren't they? Their little barricade won't hold." "Probably," Andrew admitted. "But they're doing what they think is right, protecting their own." "And what are we doing?" "Surviving." He said it simply, without pride or shame, just fact. The detour took them through industrial zones, silent factories, empty parking lots, office buildings with dark windows. Evidence of panic was everywhere: crashed cars, discarded belongings, bloodstains on concrete. But fewer bodies. The infected had moved on, following sound and movement toward populated areas. The food distribution warehouse appeared ahead, exactly as Andrew remembered it. A 3-story concrete structure surrounded by chain-link fencing, with loading docks at the rear and a small parking lot in front. The chain-link gate was closed but not locked. Good sign. Meant no one had tried to secure it yet, which meant it might still be untouched. Andrew pulled up to the gate and got out, studying the area. The warehouse's parking lot held half a dozen vehicles, probably belonging to workers who'd abandoned them when things went bad. The building's windows on the first floor were high and small, meant for ventilation rather than entry. The main entrance was a metal security door with a card reader. "Stay in the jeep," Andrew said. "Let me check it out." He approached the main entrance carefully, the .38 in his hand. The security door was locked, but he'd expected that he moved around the building's perimeter, checking for other entry points. At the loading dock, he found what he needed, a roll-up door that hadn't fully closed, leaving a 2-foot gap at the bottom. Andrew laid flat and peered under. Inside was dark, but he could see the warehouse floor, rows of metal shelving stacked with pallets, forklifts parked against walls. No movement, no sound. He slid under the door, leading with the revolver, and came up in a crouch. The warehouse was vast and silent. Emergency lighting provided dim illumination, running off backup batteries. Andrew moved between the shelving rows, checking each aisle. The inventory was exactly what he'd hoped for. Canned goods, dried foods, bottled water, commercial kitchen supplies, enough to keep 2 people fed for months if they were careful. At the back of the warehouse, he found a stairwell leading up. The second floor held offices, empty desks, dark computers, a break room with a refrigerator that had stopped running. The third floor was storage, maintenance supplies, cleaning products, tools. Andrew grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight from a supply closet and used it to complete his sweep. No infected, no survivors, just supplies and shelter. He returned to the loading dock and waved to Mum. "It's clear." "Come on." They spent the next hour moving supplies, food, water, blankets, basic medical supplies from a first aid station. Mum found the warehouse's small kitchen and started taking inventory while Andrew focused on security. He used a forklift to move pallets against the main entrance, creating a barrier. The roll-up door at the loading dock was more vulnerable, but he found a chain and padlock in the maintenance area and secured it from the inside. As darkness fell, they ate a cold dinner of canned soup and crackers in the second-floor break room. Through the window they could see Atlanta's skyline glowing with fires. Helicopters crisscrossed overhead, searchlights sweeping the streets. Occasionally they heard distant gunfire, single shots, then bursts, then silence. "Do you think we'll be safe here?" Mom asked. Andrew thought about how to answer. The truth was brutal but necessary. For a while, maybe a few weeks, maybe longer. But eventually we'll need to move again, or figure out something more permanent. I keep thinking about your Aunt Linda and Marcus, and all my friends. She trailed off, tears welling. Andrew put his arm around her. "I know, Mom. I'm sorry." They sat together as night fully claimed Atlanta, the city transforming into something primal and savage. Somewhere in the darkness, the dead walked and the living hid. Civilization had collapsed in less than 12 hours, and Andrew understood with perfect clarity that the world they'd known was gone forever. Tomorrow, they would start adapting to the new reality. Tonight, they would grieve for the old one. Day 3. Andrew woke at dawn, his body trained by 12 years of early morning shifts at the airport. The warehouse was cold. The heating had died when the power grid failed, and his breath misted in the dim light filtering through high windows. He'd slept on the floor of the break room, using his jacket as a pillow, while Mom took the couch. Not comfortable, but they'd both slept hard, exhaustion overriding fear. He stood quietly and moved to the window. The view stretched across Chambly's industrial district toward Atlanta's skyline. The fires from last night had subsided, but smoke still hung over the city like a shroud. He couldn't see any movement on the streets below. The infected seemed less active during daylight, or at least less visible. Mom stirred on the couch. "Morning, baby." "Morning. How'd you sleep?" "Better than I expected." She sat up, wincing at stiff muscles. "What's the plan?" Andrew had been thinking about that question for hours before falling asleep. "We need to inventory what we have, figure out how long we can last here. Then we need to scout the area, see if there are other survivors, maybe salvage supplies from nearby buildings." "Is it safe to go out there?" "I don't know, but we can't just hide forever." They spent the morning cataloging their resources. The warehouse was a gold mine. 300 cases of canned vegetables, 200 cases of canned fruit, pallets of dried beans and rice, commercial-sized containers of cooking oil, salt, sugar, 100 cases of bottled water. Enough to sustain 2 people for 6 months if they rationed carefully. But there were gaps. No medical supplies beyond basic first aid. Limited tools for defense. Andrew had found a box cutter and a pry bar, nothing more substantial. No communication equipment. Their cell phones were dead, towers presumably down, and most critically, no way to generate power once the warehouse's backup batteries failed. Around noon, Andrew made the decision to venture outside. He armed himself with the pry bar, left the 38 with Mom, and told her to lock herself in the second-floor office. "If I'm not back in 2 hours, don't come looking for me. Stay here and stay quiet." "Andrew, 2 hours, Mom. Promise me." She nodded reluctantly. The loading dock area was clear, and Andrew slipped outside into a grey afternoon. The temperature had dropped overnight. October in Atlanta could still surprise you, and the cold seemed to have slowed the infected, or maybe they'd migrated toward denser populations. Either way, the immediate area was quiet. He moved systematically, checking the neighboring buildings. An office supply warehouse yielded pens, paper, and critically, a hand-crank emergency radio. An automotive repair shop gave him tools. Wrenches, screwdrivers, a crowbar better than his pry bar. A closed printing shop provided nothing useful. but its second floor gave him a clear view of the surrounding area. From that vantage point, Andrew saw evidence of survivors. 3 blocks west, someone had hung white sheets from apartment windows, a distress signal. To the north, a grocery store parking lot showed signs of looting but also organization, carts arranged in defensive positions, suggesting people had fortified the location. And to the east, he saw something that made him pause. A column of military vehicles moving down Peachtree Industrial, heading south toward the city center. They're still trying to contain it. But Andrew had seen enough in the past 2 days to know containment was impossible. You couldn't contain something that turned dead people into weapons. He was descending the printing shop's external stairs when he heard voices, not the wet, hungry sounds of the infected, but actual human voices, male, angry, getting closer. Andrew ducked behind a dumpster and watched as 4 men came around the corner. They were armed. 1 had a shotgun, 2 carried machetes, the 4th had a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire. They moved with purpose, scanning windows and doors, clearly searching for supplies or people. The man with the shotgun, tall, muscular, prison tattoos covering his forearms, kicked in the door of the automotive shop Andrew had just left. "Check everything. We need food, weapons, medicine, anything useful." Andrew stayed hidden as they ransacked the shop. He could take 1 man, maybe 2 with surprise, but 4 was suicide. And these weren't desperate civilians. These were predators, the kind who saw the apocalypse as an opportunity rather than a catastrophe. After 10 minutes, the men emerged empty-handed and frustrated. "Nothing but car parts," one complained. "Food warehouse 2 blocks south," another said, pointing in the direction of Andrew's shelter. "Saw it yesterday but couldn't get the door open." Andrew's blood ran cold. "Get the bolt cutters from the truck," the leader said. "We're going to need supplies before we head back to the compound." They moved off, and Andrew waited 30 seconds before sprinting back to the warehouse. His 2 hours weren't up, but this couldn't wait. He slipped through the loading dock and found Mom in the office, exactly where he'd left her. "We have a problem," he said, quickly explaining what he'd overheard. Mom's face went pale. "What do we do?" "We have options. We can fight. 4 men against 2 of us. Bad odds, but maybe manageable if we use the terrain we can hide. Make them think the place is already picked clean. Or we can negotiate. Try to join them. Safety in numbers." "I don't like any of those options." "Neither do I." Andrew moved to the window and watched the street. "But if we run, we'll be starting from 0 again. All these supplies, this shelter, we'd lose it all." "Supplies don't matter if we're dead." She was right, and Andrew knew it. But something in him rebelled against giving up this position. They'd found safety, resources, a defendable location. Running meant going back into the chaos, the uncertainty, the constant threat. "How long until they get here?" Mom asked. "Maybe an hour. Maybe less if they move fast." "Then we need to decide now." Andrew thought about his training at the airport, dealing with angry passengers, diffusing confrontations, finding compromise positions. But this wasn't a delayed flight or lost luggage. This was survival at its most primitive, and compromise might mean weakness. "We hide," he decided. "Make it look like this place has already been looted. Scatter some empty boxes around the loading dock, break open a few pallets. If they think there's nothing here, they'll move on." They worked quickly, staging evidence of prior looting. Andrew broke open 2 pallets of canned goods and scattered cans across the warehouse floor. Mom took boxes of supplies up to the 3rd floor, hiding them behind maintenance equipment. They made it look like someone had already taken everything of value. Then they retreated to the 3rd floor storage area, behind rows of industrial shelving, and waited. 30 minutes later, they heard the sound of bolt cutters on chain. The loading dock door rattled, then rose with a screech of metal. Voices echoed through the warehouse. "Check it out! Looks like someone beat us here." "Fuck. Search it anyway. Maybe they left something." Andrew and Mom pressed deeper into their hiding spot, trying to control their breathing. Below, the men spread out, searching the aisles. Footsteps on metal stairs. One of them was coming up. Andrew gripped the crowbar, ready to fight if discovered, but the man who reached the second floor seemed half-hearted in his search, kicking open a few office doors before calling down, "Nothing up here but empty desks." "Anything in the loading area?" The leader's voice, "Some damaged cans. This place is picked clean." "Damn it. All right, let's move. Hit the electronics shop on Broad Street." The footsteps retreated. The loading dock door screeched down. Silence. Andrew waited 10 minutes before emerging from hiding. He crept to the window and watched the 4 men walk away, disappearing around a corner. Only then did he let himself exhale. "That was too close," Mom said. "Yeah." Andrew's hands were shaking from adrenaline. "But it proves something. There are other survivors, and not all of them are friendly. We need to be more careful." They spent the rest of the day reinforcing their position. Andrew found rolls of chain-link fencing in the storage area and used them to create a second barrier inside the loading dock. He set up noise traps, strings of cans that would rattle if anyone tried to enter. Mom organized their supplies into categories, creating a system for rationing that would extend their resources. As evening fell, they tuned into the hand-crank radio. Most stations were dead, but one, broadcasting from somewhere northwest of the city, still operated. "This is Emergency Broadcast Station Whiskey Foxtrot, Day 3 of the crisis. For those still alive and listening, do not approach military checkpoints. Repeat, do not approach military checkpoints. Containment has failed. They are shooting on sight to prevent spread. Seek shelter in place. Conserve water and food. Avoid cities. We will continue broadcasting survival information and safe zone locations as they become available." The broadcast cut to static, then repeated. Andrew and Mom looked at each other in the dim light of the break room, the reality of their situation sinking deeper. The government wasn't coming to save them. The military was falling back, not advancing. They were truly on their own. "I've been thinking," Mom said quietly, "about what you said yesterday, about these things not being sick people. What do you think happened? What caused this?" Andrew thought back to the cooler in the airport, the CDC shipment with its damaged casing and Project Obsidian gate labels. "I think it was deliberate, not the outbreak, that was probably an accident, but the virus itself, or whatever it is. I think someone made it. Bioweapon? Maybe, or an experiment that got loose. Does it matter? I suppose not." She was quiet for a moment. "Your father used to say that when everything goes to hell, all you can do is take care of the people right in front of you." He meant family, neighbors, co-workers, people you have a connection to. I remember. I keep thinking about that. About all the people we didn't help today, the distress signals we saw, the survivors at that grocery store, even those men who came here. They were monsters, but they were also just trying to survive. Andrew understood what she was wrestling with, the guilt of survival, the moral weight of choosing yourself over others. "We help who we can, Mom, but we can't save everyone, and trying to would just get us killed." "I know, but it doesn't make it easier." They sat in silence as darkness claimed the warehouse. Outside, the dead walked. Inside, 2 people held on to life by their fingernails, adapting to a world where the old rules no longer applied. Day 7. The rhythm of survival became routine faster than Andrew expected. Wake at dawn, check the perimeter, ration breakfast, 1 can of fruit, 1 package of crackers. Inventory supplies, scout from the upper windows. Ration lunch, work on fortifications. Ration dinner, listen to the emergency broadcast. Sleep. The monotony was broken by moments of terror and occasional small discoveries. On day 4, a horde of infected, maybe 30 of them, passed within a block of the warehouse drawn by gunfire to the north. Andrew and Mom hid in the basement, barely breathing, until the danger passed. On day 5, they found a working battery-powered lantern in the maintenance area, allowing them to move around after dark without fear of giving away their position. On day 6, the emergency broadcast announced the fall of 3 more cities: Charlotte, Jacksonville, Nashville. By day 7, Andrew had developed a better understanding of the infected. They were attracted to sound. Anything louder than a whisper could draw them. They hunted by smell. He'd watched them sniff the air like bloodhounds tracking prey. And they didn't seem to decay normally. Bodies that should have been rotting after a week in October, heat still moved with deadly purpose. "They're not dead," Andrew said that evening as he and Mom picked at dinner. "That's what I keep coming back to. Dead things rot. These things don't, so whatever the virus does, it keeps the body functional somehow." Mom pushed her food around. She'd been eating less each day despite Andrew's encouragement. "Does it matter?" "It matters because if they're not truly dead, there might be a cure, or at least a way to stop them besides destroying the brain." "Have you seen anything that suggests that's possible?" Andrew admitted he hadn't. Every encounter he'd witnessed ended one of 2 ways. The infected killed their prey, or the prey destroyed the infected's brain. No middle ground. His phone, dead since day 3, had been acting as a paperweight on the break room table. Now, on impulse, Andrew picked it up and pressed the power button. Nothing happened. The battery was completely drained. But in a drawer, Mom found a dusty phone charger. The warehouse still had minimal backup power, enough to run emergency lights and maybe charge a phone. Andrew plugged it in and waited. 5 minutes later, the screen flickered to life. No signal. The cell towers were still down. But the phone retained its stored data, photos, contacts, messages from before the world ended. He scrolled through his photo gallery. Pictures from company barbecues, a selfie with Marcus at the airport, Mom on her birthday last year, evidence of a life that felt impossibly distant now. Then he found a video he'd forgotten about, something he'd recorded on day 1 in the chaos of the freight hangar. His hands must have hit record by accident during the struggle with Ray. The footage was shaky, mostly showing the floor, but the audio was clear. Ray's wet, hungry sounds, Shanice screaming, Andrew's own panicked breathing, and underneath it all, a rhythmic clicking that Andrew now recognized as characteristic of the infected. He played it again, listening more carefully. The clicking had a pattern, almost like Morse code, but not quite. A form of communication. He filed that thought away. Worth investigating later if he survived. "I need to go out tomorrow," Andrew announced. "We're running low on fresh water, and I want to check those other survivor locations I spotted." "I'll come with you." "Mom, I'll come with you," she repeated firmly. "You need someone watching your back. And I'm going crazy sitting here doing nothing." Andrew wanted to argue, but he saw the determination in her eyes, the same stubbornness that had raised him alone after Dad died. "Okay, but we stick together, and if I say we run, we run. No arguments." "Deal." They spent the evening preparing, filling backpacks with supplies to trade, choosing weapons, the crowbar for Andrew, a heavy wrench for Mom, and planning their route. The grocery store was closest, maybe 15 minutes on foot if they were careful. They'd approach from the east, using industrial buildings for cover, and assess the situation before making contact. Sleep came hard that night. Andrew lay on the break room floor, listening to the distant sounds of the city, helicopters overhead, occasional gunfire, once the screech of metal that might have been a car crash or building collapse. And always, underneath it all, the sense of watching eyes and hungry mouths in the darkness. Day 8. They left at first light, When the infected were slowest, Andrew led the way, moving between buildings like he'd learned in those first desperate days, quick dashes between cover points, constant scanning for threats, never making unnecessary noise. The grocery store appeared after 20 minutes of careful movement. It was a mid-sized chain store, its parking lot ringed with shopping carts positioned to create a barrier. Someone had spray-painted, "Occupied, we will defend," across the front windows. Smart, announce your presence to warn off casual raiders, show strength to deter serious threats. Andrew and Mom approached slowly, hands visible, weapons lowered. When they were 50 feet from the cart barrier, a voice called out, "That's far enough!" A man appeared on the store's roof, 40s, lean, holding a hunting rifle. Two more people emerged from the store entrance, both armed with baseball bats. The man on the roof had his rifle trained on Andrew. "We're not here to cause trouble," Andrew called out. "Just looking to see if you need supplies or want to trade." "What have you got?" the man asked, not lowering the rifle. "Water, canned goods, basic medical supplies. We're looking for information mostly, trying to figure out if there are organized survivor groups, safe routes out of the city." The man studied them for a long moment. Then, "Charlie, check 'em out." One of the bat-wielders approached, a woman in her 30s, athletic, moving with the confidence of someone who'd done martial arts. She patted down Andrew and Mom quickly, efficiently, finding the .38 in Mom's jacket. "They're armed," Charlie called back. "Of course they're armed," the roofman said. "Would you come out here naked? Keep the pistol, but no funny moves." Charlie returned the .38 and gestured for Andrew and Mom to follow her into the store inside. The grocery store had been transformed into a fortress. Shelves had been pushed against windows and doors. The aisles were organized like a military supply depot. And in the center of it all, maybe 20 people had created a small community. Families, elderly folks, teenagers, all working together. The man from the roof climbed down and introduced himself. "I'm Derek. Used to manage this place before everything went to hell. Who are you?" "Andrew Hoskins. This is my mom, Jean. I worked at the airport." Derek's eyes sharpened. "You were there day one?" "Yeah, saw it start. Got out before the worst of it. Tell me what you saw." Andrew described the cooler, the CDC breach, Ray Tomlinson's transformation. Derek listened intently, asking specific questions about timing, symptoms, behavior. When Andrew finished, Derek nodded grimly. "Matches what we've pieced together. CDC had some kind of containment failure. Military tried to lock down Atlanta, but they underestimated how fast it spread. Now we're in a hot zone with no government support and dwindling resources." "You've been here since day one?" Mom asked. "Day two. I was closing up when the emergency broadcast started. Figured this place was as good as any to hole up. Food, water, medical supplies. Others started showing up over the next few days. We've got 23 people now, but we're reaching capacity." Andrew looked around at the survivors. They seemed organized, disciplined, but he also saw the strain. Hollow eyes, thin frames, the constant nervous energy of people living on the edge. "What's your biggest problem?" he asked. Derek didn't hesitate. "Water. We've got food for a couple months if we ration, but the water shut off 3 days ago. We're collecting rainwater and boiling it, but that's not sustainable long term. If we can't find a reliable water source, we'll have to abandon this position." Andrew thought about the warehouse's massive water supply. They had more than enough to share, but something made him hesitate. Once he revealed the warehouse location, it became a target. Every survivor in Atlanta would want what he had. Before he could respond, one of the teenagers on lookout duty called down, "Derek, we've got movement, northeast corner." Everyone tensed. Derek grabbed a pair of binoculars and climbed to a position where he could see over the cart barrier. "Shit! We've got a group approaching, looks like 7, 8 people, armed." "The infected?" someone asked. "No, living people, and they're not moving friendly." Andrew climbed up beside Derek and looked through the binoculars. The approaching group was the same 4 men who'd raided the automotive shop, plus 4 more. They moved in formation, weapons ready, clearly experienced in violence. "You know them?" Derek asked. "Saw them a few days ago. Raiders, basically. They're setting up some kind of compound and taking supplies from anyone who can't defend themselves." Derek's jaw tightened. "Well, we can defend ourselves. Everyone, positions." The grocery store survivors moved with practiced efficiency, taking defensive positions behind the cart barrier and in second-floor windows. Andrew found himself handed a bat and positioned behind an overturned shopping cart, Mom beside him. The raiders stopped 30 yards from the store. Their leader, the tall man with prison tattoos, called out, "We know you got supplies in there. Share them, and everyone walks away happy." "We've got nothing to share," Derek responded. "Find your own supplies." "That ain't how this works." The leader's voice hardened. "You got 20 people in there, we got 8. But we got better weapons, and the willingness to use them. Last chance to do this the easy way." Andrew leaned toward Derek. "They're serious. They'll attack if you don't negotiate. I'm not giving these vultures anything. We've worked too hard to build this." "Then people are going to die." Derek met Andrew's eyes. "Yeah, but if we cave to every thug with a gun, we'll die anyway, just slower." The standoff continued for 30 seconds. Then the raider leader raised his shotgun and fired into the air, a warning shot. "Time's up! Give us half your supplies or we come in and take everything." "Go to hell!" Derek shouted back. The raiders opened fire. Bullets punched through shopping carts and ricocheted off concrete. Andrew pulled Mom down behind cover as the grocery store defenders returned fire. The battle was chaotic, terrifying, over in 90 seconds. When the smoke cleared, 2 raiders lay dead in the parking lot. A third was wounded, dragging himself away. The survivors had taken casualties too, 1 dead, 3 wounded, and worst of all, the gunfire had drawn attention. From the north, south, and west, infected came running. Dozens of them, attracted by the noise like moths to flame. They ignored the raiders and the survivors equally, just charged toward the source of the sound with mechanical hunger. "Everyone inside!" Derek shouted. "Seal the doors!" The defenders retreated into the store, barricading doors and windows. Outside, the infected fell on the wounded raider. His screams lasted 5 seconds before being cut off. Andrew and Mom found themselves trapped inside with the other survivors, watching through windows as the infected surrounded the building. There had to be 60 of them now, maybe more, all pressing against the cart barrier, testing it for weaknesses. "This is bad," Derek said quietly. "We can hold them off for a while, but if they don't disperse—" "They will," Andrew said, hoping he was right. "They're attracted to sound. Once it's quiet, they'll lose interest and move on. How long? Hours, maybe, I don't know." They waited in tense silence as the infected circled the building. Some tried to climb the cart barrier and were beaten back by survivors with poles. Others simply pressed against the metal, mouths open, hands grasping at nothing. It was during this siege that Andrew noticed something that would change everything. 2 of the infected were different from the others. They moved faster, more coordinated, and when one of them clicked that distinctive pattern, the others responded, adjusting their positions like a coordinated unit. "Jesus," Andrew breathed. "They're communicating." Derek saw it too. "That's not possible. They're mindless. Look at them. They're working together, using strategy." As if to prove Andrew's point, the 2 fast-moving infected suddenly charged the weakest point of the cart barrier, a section held together by bungee cords. The barrier buckled under their combined weight, and other infected poured through the gap. "Breach!" someone screamed. "Breach on the south side!" The survivors fell back to a second line of defense, the store's interior barricades, but panic was setting in. People were screaming, firing weapons wildly, abandoning positions. "We need to go," Andrew told Mom. "Now, while we still can." They moved toward the back of the store, where a fire exit opened onto a loading area. Derek saw them leaving and grabbed Andrew's arm. "Where are you going?" "We can't stay here. This position is lost. If you leave, others will follow. The whole defense will collapse." "It's already collapsing." Andrew pulled free. "I'm sorry, but I won't die for a grocery store." He and Mom slipped out the fire exit into the loading area behind them. The sounds of fighting intensified. Screams, gunfire, that horrible wet sound of the infected feeding. Andrew felt guilt twist in his gut, but kept moving. Dad's advice: take care of the people right in front of you. They ran east through alleys and side streets, not stopping until the grocery store was out of sight. When Andrew finally let them rest behind an abandoned pizza restaurant, Mom was pale and shaking. "Those people," she said, "we just left them to die. They made their choice. Derek chose to fight. We chose to run. And you think we're better than him?" Andrew didn't have an answer for that. They made it back to the warehouse by mid-afternoon, exhausted and traumatized. But the sight that greeted them stopped Andrew cold. The chain-link gate was open and their Jeep was gone. Someone had found their shelter, and they'd taken the first step toward taking everything else. Day 10, Andrew and Mom approached the warehouse carefully, weapons ready, expecting an ambush, but the building was empty. Whoever had taken the Jeep hadn't stayed. A quick inventory revealed they'd also taken food, maybe a week's worth, and all the bottled water they could carry. "Could have been worse," Andrew said, trying to find a silver lining. "They could have burned the place down out of spite." Mom wasn't comforted. "They know about us now. They could come back with more people." She was right, and Andrew knew it. Their position was compromised, but moving again meant starting over, carrying only what they could haul on foot, vulnerable to every threat between here and wherever they went next. That night, Andrew lay awake strategizing. They needed to relocate. But where? The mountains were too far without transportation. The suburbs were too populated. Every house would be picked clean or defended by desperate survivors. They needed somewhere isolated, defensible, with access to resources. An idea formed: the industrial parks near Lake Lanier, 40 miles north. Before the outbreak, Andrew had delivered cargo there for a company that made water filtration systems. The area was rural, but not remote, with multiple buildings that could be fortified. And Lake Lanier meant unlimited water if they could purify it. "We go north," Andrew announced the next morning. "Lake Lanier area, on foot, moving at night when the infected are slower." 40 miles. Mum looked doubtful. "That'll take days. 3 or 4 if we move carefully, but it's our best option." They spent day 11 preparing, filling backpacks with essential supplies, choosing weapons they could carry long-term, studying maps Andrew had found in the warehouse office. He plotted a route that avoided major roads and population centers, following service corridors and rural highways, north on day 12. They left the warehouse for the last time. Andrew took one look back at the building that had sheltered them, then turned north and didn't stop. The journey was a brutal education in post-apocalypse survival. They traveled by night, hiding during the day in abandoned buildings or thick brush. Every sound was a potential threat. Every shadow could be an infected or hostile survivor. They rationed food strictly, 1 meal per day, usually cold canned goods eaten in silence. On night 2 of the journey, they encountered their first major obstacle, a checkpoint manned by survivors who'd claimed a section of Highway 23. Unlike the earlier checkpoint, these people weren't interested in protecting their neighborhood. They were charging a toll: food, medicine, or weapons, the checkpoint leader said. He was younger than Andrew, maybe 30, with dead eyes and a military-style rifle. "Pay the toll or turn back." "We don't have anything to spare," Andrew said. "Then you don't pass." Andrew considered fighting 3 guards at the checkpoint versus 2 travelers. Bad odds, but not impossible. But the fight would draw infected, and they'd lose precious supplies. Even if they won, What about information? Mom offered suddenly. We know about infected behavior, about military movements, about where to find supplies. The checkpoint leader considered this. What kind of information? Mom described what they'd learned about the infected, the clicking communication, the fast-moving variants, the attraction to sound. The leader listened with growing interest. All right, he said finally. That's worth passage. But I'm warning you, don't come back this way. We remember faces, and we don't give second chances. They passed through and continued north. Behind them, the checkpoint guards were already sharing what Mom had told them, adapting their defenses, small payment for safe passage. On night 3, they reached the outskirts of Cumming, a small city that had been overwhelmed early in the outbreak. The entire downtown was a nightmare landscape of burned buildings and wandering infected. Andrew and Mum circled west, adding miles but staying safe. It was near Cumming that they met Daniel. He appeared from the darkness like a ghost, emerging from behind a water tower with his hands raised. "Don't shoot! I'm not infected. I'm not a threat." Andrew had his crowbar up immediately. "Stop right there!" The man stopped. He was in his 50s, wearing dirty business-casual clothes and carrying a battered briefcase. His face was gaunt, his hands shaking. "Please, I need help. I haven't eaten in 3 days." "Why should we trust you?" Andrew asked. "Because I'm alone, unarmed and desperate. If I wanted to hurt you, I'd have brought friends." Mom touched Andrew's arm. "Give him something. He's not a threat." Against his better judgment, Andrew handed over a can of beans and a bottle of water. Daniel consumed them with pathetic gratitude, eating so fast he made himself sick. "Thank you," he gasped between bites. "God, thank you." "Where are you trying to go?" Mom asked. "Anywhere safe. I was an accountant in Alpharetta. When things went bad, I tried to reach my sister in Gainesville, but I got lost, ran out of supplies." He trailed off, seeing his own failure reflected in their eyes. "We're heading to Lake Lanier," Andrew said. "You can travel with us tonight, but tomorrow you're on your own." Daniel agreed eagerly. Having a third person actually helped. They could take shifts watching while the others rested, and Daniel proved surprisingly knowledgeable about the area, pointing out shortcuts and danger zones. On night 4, they reached Lake Lanier. The lake stretched before them, vast and dark under starlight, representing both opportunity and risk. Infected clustered around the shoreline, hundreds of them, drawn to the water but unable to figure out how to drink it. The sight was surreal and terrifying. "There," Andrew said, pointing to an industrial complex on the western shore. "That's where we're headed." The complex consisted of 3 buildings surrounded by a chain-link fence. The main building was the water filtration company Andrew remembered. Concrete construction, minimal windows, loading docks that could be secured. The other buildings were storage units and a small administrative office. They approached carefully, circling the complex twice to check for threats. The fence was intact but not locked. The buildings appeared abandoned but not looted. Perfect. "You're welcome to stay," Andrew told Daniel as they entered the complex. "But you pull your weight. No freeloaders." Daniel nodded gratefully. "I'll do whatever you need." They spent day 13 exploring and securing the complex. The main building was better than Andrew had hoped. The filtration company had left behind not just equipment, but supplies, water purification tablets, testing kits, spare parts. The storage units held industrial supplies, tools, even a gasoline generator. But the real treasure was in the administrative office. A gun safe that Andrew managed to pry open inside were 3 hunting rifles, 2 handguns, and several hundred rounds of ammunition. The previous owner had been a survivalist, apparently, and his paranoia had created a windfall for Andrew. "We could defend this place," Mom said that evening as they ate their first hot meal in days, soup heated on a camp stove. "Really defend it? I mean fences, weapons, water from the lake." We could, Andrew agreed. He looked at Daniel, who'd proven himself useful throughout the day, organizing supplies and reinforcing doors, but it's going to take work, a lot of work. I'm in, Daniel said immediately. I've got nowhere else to go. The three of them sat in the growing darkness, listening to the distant sounds of infected on the lakeshore, and began planning how to transform the industrial complex into something that could sustain them through the winter and beyond. Day 17. The complex took shape through brutal labor. Andrew and Daniel reinforced the chain-link fence with scavenged materials, metal sheets, barbed wire, wooden posts. Mom organized the supplies into a functional inventory system, cataloging every can of food and bottle of water. They established routines: wake at dawn, work until dark, take shifts, standing watch at night. The lake provided their primary advantage. Using the filtration company's equipment, Andrew set up a purification system that could process lake water into something drinkable. It wasn't perfect. The filters would need replacing eventually, but it solved their most critical resource problem. Food was trickier. The complex had some supplies, but not enough to sustain 3 people indefinitely. They needed to scavenge, which meant leaving the safety of their compound. Andrew drew up a schedule. Every 3 days, one person would venture out on supply runs, while the other 2 maintained the base. On day 18, Andrew took the first run, targeting a Walmart 3 miles south. He left before dawn, moving through the woods along the lakeshore to avoid main roads. The Walmart was a scene from hell. Windows smashed, interior burned, bodies everywhere. But Andrew had learned to compartmentalize horror, to focus on the practical. He found usable supplies in the stockroom, canned goods that had survived the fire, bottled water, batteries, a first aid kit. He loaded everything into a shopping cart and was preparing to leave when he heard voices. 4 people emerged from the Walmart's garden center, 3 men and a woman, all armed, all looking at Andrew with predatory interest. "Well, well," one of the men said. He was middle-aged, heavy-set, carrying a crowbar. "Look what we found. Another rat picking through the scraps." Andrew's hand went to his pistol. "I don't want trouble. I'm just getting supplies and leaving." "Oh, you're leaving all right, but you're leaving those supplies with us. Consider it a finder's fee." Andrew calculated odds. 4 against 1, all armed, blocking his exit. Fighting was suicide, but giving up the supplies meant returning empty-handed, meant the run was wasted. "How about we share?" Andrew offered. "Half for you, half for me. Nobody has to get hurt." The heavy-set man laughed. "How about you give us everything and we let you live? That's generous, considering." One of the other men suddenly raised a hand. "Wait, listen." They all froze. From somewhere in the Walmart's interior came that distinctive sound, wet, hungry clicking. The infected were inside, attracted by their voices. The standoff broke instantly. The 4 people scattered, abandoning Andrew and his cart. Andrew grabbed what he could carry and ran for the exit, not looking back as screams echoed behind him. He didn't know if the infected caught them. He didn't want to know. The run back to the complex was a nightmare. 4 miles with 40 pounds of supplies, constantly checking over his shoulder, diving into brush whenever he heard sounds. But he made it, arriving at sunset with enough food to justify the risk. "Did you run into trouble?" Mom asked. Seeing his expression, "Some," Andrew admitted, "but I'm okay." Daniel took the next supply run on day 21, targeting a smaller grocery store to the north. He returned with less supplies, but reported something interesting. He'd seen another survivor group, maybe a dozen people, setting up in a gated community near the lake they'd waved to him but hadn't approached. "Should we make contact?" Daniel asked. Andrew thought about it. More people meant more security, but also more complexity. Resources would need to be shared. Decisions would become group consensus rather than quick action, and if that group turned hostile. "Not yet," Andrew decided. "Let's keep observing them, see how they operate." Over the next week, they watched the gated community from a distance. The survivor group there seemed organized, disciplined. They'd fortified the entrance, established guard rotations, even started a small garden in one of the backyards. It was impressive, and it made Andrew feel inadequate about their own setup. On day 24, the decision to make contact was made for them. A young woman appeared at their gate, hands raised, clearly exhausted. "Please, I need help. My group, we're under attack." Andrew opened the gate cautiously. "Who's attacking you?" "Infected. A huge horde, maybe 100 of them. They surrounded our community last night. We've been fighting them off, but we're running out of ammunition. People are dying." Tears streamed down her face. "Please, we have children. We need help." Andrew looked at Mom and Daniel. They'd made a commitment to survival, to protecting themselves, but that didn't mean they'd become monsters. "How far?" Andrew asked. 2 miles. Please hurry." Andrew grabbed one of the hunting rifles and filled his pockets with ammunition. Daniel armed himself with a pistol. Mom insisted on coming too, carrying the third rifle despite Andrew's protests. They followed the woman, her name was Sarah, through the woods toward the gated community. The sounds reached them before the sight, gunfire, screaming, that horrible wet sound of feeding. Andrew's instinct was to turn back, to run from danger rather than toward it. But something about Sarah's desperation, about the mention of children, had overridden his survival instinct. The gated community was under siege. Infected pressed against the outer wall from all sides, climbing over each other to reach the defenders. Bodies lay everywhere, both infected and human. And on the walls, maybe a dozen survivors fought desperately, using rifles, handguns, anything they could find to keep the horde at bay. "Shit," Daniel breathed. "This is suicide." Andrew assessed the situation with the same analytical mind he'd used to coordinate baggage at the airport. The defenders were focused on the main gate, where the pressure was greatest, but the infected were coming from all directions, thinning their forces, creating weak points. "We hit them from behind," Andrew said. "Break their numbers, give the defenders breathing room." "There's 100 of them!" "There were 100, I count maybe 60 still moving. Rest are already dead or too damaged to fight." Andrew led them wide around the community, approaching from the southeast, where the infected concentration was thinnest. Then he raised his rifle and started firing. The hunting rifle kicked like a mule, but Andrew had fired guns at ranges before. Not often, but enough to know the basics. He aimed for heads, firing steadily, dropping infected one at a time. Beside him, Mom and Daniel added their own fire. The infected reacted immediately, some breaking away from the walls to charge toward this new threat. But Andrew had anticipated that. "Fall back, keep them spread out." They retreated through the trees, firing as they went, drawing infected away from the community. It was terrifying, exhilarating, insane. But it was working. The pressure on the walls decreased. The defenders regrouped, focusing their fire more effectively. For 10 minutes, Andrew and his group played a deadly game of cat and mouse with the infected. They'd fire, kill a few, retreat, fire again. The infected were relentless but mindless. They could be manipulated, led into kill zones, thinned through careful tactics. Finally, the horde broke. The remaining infected, maybe 20 of them, scattered into the woods, following different survivors who'd fled the community. The immediate threat was over. Andrew approached the gate cautiously, rifle lowered but ready. A man appeared on the wall, 30s, wearing a police uniform, face covered in blood that might have been his own or someone else's. "Who are you?" "Andrew Hoskins. We've got a place about 2 miles south." Sarah came asking for help. The cop, his name tag read Martinez, studied them, then he nodded. "Thank you. You saved lives today. I'm Officer Javier Martinez. Come inside, we need to talk." The gated community looked like a war zone. Bodies littered the streets. Defenders who'd fallen from the walls, infected that had breached the perimeter before being put down. Survivors moved among the dead, checking for wounded, eliminating infected that still showed signs of movement. Children watched from windows with hollow eyes. "How many did you lose?" Andrew asked. 7 dead, 4 wounded. We started with 32 people. Martinez's voice was flat, traumatized. "This is the 3rd major attack in 10 days. Each one's been bigger than the last. We can't sustain this." "Why are they targeting you specifically?" "We're visible. We've got walls, lights at night, gardens. Everything that makes this place defensible also makes it a target." Martinez gestured to the bodies. "The infected might be mindless, but they know prey when they see it." Mom was helping treat the wounded. Using supplies from the community's medical kit, Andrew saw her working alongside a woman who'd been a nurse, both of them trying to save a man with a deep bite to his arm. But Andrew knew what that bite meant. Once infected, you were dead. Just a matter of time. "You need to evacuate," Andrew said to Martinez. "This position can't hold." "Where would we go? These people are families, elderly folks, kids. We can't exactly pack up and hike through infected territory." "You have vehicles. Some, but fuel's running low, and the roads are clogged." Andrew thought about the industrial complex, about their careful rationing and limited supplies. Adding 30 people would strain everything they'd built, but leaving them here was a death sentence. "We've got a compound," Andrew said slowly, "smaller than this but more defensible. On the lake with water filtration and supplies. We could take some of you, not all. We don't have the capacity, but the most vulnerable. Kids, elderly, wounded." Martinez looked at him with something like hope. "You'd do that?" "On conditions. Everyone works. Everyone shares watches. And if supplies get tight, we make tough decisions together." Andrew met the cop's eyes. "I'm not promising paradise. Just survival. That's all any of us want." They spent the rest of the day organizing the evacuation. 12 people, mostly families with young children, would go with Andrew to the complex. The rest would stay at the community, better equipped now with shared knowledge and tactics. The migration happened at night, a slow procession through dangerous territory. Andrew led the way, hyper-aware that every sound, every stumble could attract infected, but they reached the complex without incident, arriving at dawn on day 25. The industrial compound felt suddenly crowded. 12 new people meant noise, movement, resource strain. But it also meant more hands for work, more eyes for watches, more voices to share the psychological burden of survival. Among the new arrivals was a teenager named Marcus, named for the airport worker by strange coincidence, who'd been studying engineering before the outbreak. He looked at the water filtration system Andrew had rigged and immediately started suggesting improvements. A woman named Rita had been an EMT. She took over medical responsibilities from Mom, and Officer Martinez brought military-style discipline to their defense planning. "This could actually work," Daniel said that evening as they watched the new arrivals settle in a real community. Andrew wanted to believe it, but he'd seen enough of the new world to know that real communities attracted attention, and attention attracted threats. Day 30. The compound evolved rapidly with the influx of people and skills. Marcus improved the water filtration system, increasing output by 30%. Rita organized a medical bay in the administrative office. Martinez drilled everyone in defense protocols. The children, 3 of them, ages 6 to 12, brought an unexpected morale boost. Their laughter, rare as it was, reminded everyone what they were fighting to preserve. But with growth came tension. Resources that had seemed abundant for 3 people were stretched thin, for 15 conflicts emerged. Who got the best sleeping quarters? Who did the dangerous supply runs? How much food each person received? Andrew found himself mediating disputes, making decisions he wasn't equipped to make. On day 32, the first serious conflict erupted. One of the new arrivals, a man named Greg, who'd been a construction foreman, accused Daniel of hoarding food. The accusation was bullshit. Andrew had personally watched Daniel distribute rations fairly, but paranoia was setting in, a natural consequence of constant stress and limited resources. "I saw him sneaking cans into his bag," Greg insisted. "Extra rations while the rest of us go hungry." "That's not true," Daniel protested. "I was reorganizing the storage." The argument escalated until Martinez physically separated them. In the end, Andrew called a group meeting, the first formal gathering since they'd formed this makeshift community. "We need rules," Andrew announced. "Written rules that everyone agrees to follow. Otherwise, we'll tear ourselves apart before the infected do." They spent 2 hours hammering out a basic social contract: equal rations for everyone, mandatory work contributions, democratic decision-making for major choices, and a council of 3, Andrew, Martinez, and Rita, to resolve disputes. It wasn't perfect, but it was structure, and structure meant stability. The next major challenge came from outside on day 35. During a supply run to a hardware store 6 miles north, Andrew and Martinez encountered a group of survivors who called themselves the New Order. 20 strong, heavily armed, occupying a fortified warehouse complex that dwarfed Andrew's compound. Their leader was a man named Colonel Harris. Whether he'd actually been a colonel or just gave himself the title was unclear. He was 50s, charismatic, with the bearing of someone who'd commanded troops, and he had an offer. "Join us," Harris said, gesturing to his fortress. "We're building something here, a real community, with security, resources, organization. We've got over 100 people now, mechanics, doctors, engineers, everything you need to survive long term." "What's the catch?" Andrew asked. "No catch. We accept everyone willing to work and follow orders, but we're selective about leadership. I saw you two handle those infected outside the hardware store. You're tactical, disciplined. We could use people like you." Martinez looked tempted. "What are your supply levels?" "Better than adequate. We've been systematically clearing the area, stockpiling everything we find. We've got 6 months of food, maybe longer if we ration." It was a seductive offer. Safety in numbers, professional organization, actual infrastructure. But something about Harris set off alarms in Andrew's head. The man was too smooth, too practiced. This wasn't a desperate survivor building community. This was an opportunist building an empire. "We'll think about it," Andrew said non-committally back at the compound. Andrew and Martinez debated. Martinez was in favor of joining. The security advantages were undeniable, but Andrew remained skeptical. "Did you see how his people looked at him?" Andrew asked. "That wasn't respect. That was fear. Maybe fear's what keeps people alive now. Or maybe it's what makes them slaves." The debate became moot the next day when Harris sent a delegation to the compound. 8 armed men who delivered an ultimatum: join the New Order by day 40, or be considered hostile. The colonel's consolidating all survivor groups in the region, the delegation leader explained. He can't allow independent groups that might compete for resources. After they left, the compound erupted in debate. Some wanted to join immediately, scared of Harris's implied threat. Others wanted to fight, maintain their independence. The children's parents were terrified that violence would find them again. Andrew called another council meeting. "We need to make a decision together. Stay independent and risk conflict, or join Harris and give up autonomy." "What if there's a third option?" It was Marcus, the teenager, speaking up. "We leave. Find somewhere more remote, somewhere Harris won't bother us." "Run again?" Greg said skeptically. "How far do we have to run before we're safe?" "As far as necessary," Mum said quietly. She'd been silent through most of the debate, but now she fixed the group with a steady gaze. "I've been alive 63 years. I've seen communism, I've seen fascism, I've seen every kind of tyranny humans can devise. That Harris man, he's building tyranny. And you can't negotiate with tyranny. You either submit or you run." Her words carried weight. After an hour of debate, they voted, 12-3 in favor of leaving. They'd pack up, move north toward the mountains, find somewhere truly isolated, but they'd underestimated Harris's timeline. On day 38, 2 days before their planned departure, the New Order attacked. It started just after dawn. Andrew was on watch when he saw them coming. 20 men approaching through the woods, moving with military precision. He hit the alarm, a triangle hanging outside the administrative office, and everyone scrambled to defensive positions. The first shots came from the New Order forces, suppressing fire designed to keep the compound defenders pinned. Then came the voice amplifier. "This is Colonel Harris. You had your chance to join peacefully. Now we're taking what we need." Martinez coordinated the defense, positioning people along the fence line with rifles. But the New Order had superior numbers and firepower. They advanced methodically, using covering fire and movement tactics that suggested real military training. Andrew found himself behind a concrete barrier, firing at shapes moving between trees. Beside him, Daniel was white-faced but steady, squeezing off shots with surprising accuracy. Across the compound, he could see Mom helping load weapons, Rita treating a woman who'd taken shrapnel from a ricochet, the children huddled in the administrative office's basement. The battle lasted 20 minutes, an eternity measured in heartbeats and muzzle flashes. The New Order pushed to the fence, breached it in 2 places, started pouring inside. Andrew fell back to a secondary position, firing until his rifle clicked empty, then switching to his pistol. A New Order soldier appeared around a corner, rifle raised. Andrew fired twice, hitting him in the chest. The man went down, and Andrew felt nothing. No guilt, no triumph, just the mechanical necessity of survival. Then Martinez went down, taking a bullet to the leg. The defense collapsed without his coordination. People scattered, running for the buildings or trying to escape through the back gate. The compound was lost. Andrew grabbed Mom and Daniel. "We need to go, now!" They ran for the lake, where they'd hidden an emergency cache, backpacks with supplies, weapons, basic necessities. Behind them, the New Order swept through the compound, securing it with ruthless efficiency. At the water's edge, Andrew looked back one final time. He saw Harris's men rounding up the survivors who hadn't fled, forcing them to their knees. He saw the children being led away, saw Rita arguing with a soldier, saw everything they'd built being seized by force. "We have to help them," Daniel said. "We can't," Andrew replied, voice hollow. "We'd just be captured too." They fled north along the lakeshore, 3 people with backpacks and weapons, leaving behind 15 others to an uncertain fate. The guilt was crushing, but Andrew's survival instinct overrode it. Keep moving, stay alive. Everything else was secondary. Day 45. The lake region was a maze of isolated cabins and vacation homes. Most abandoned or occupied by infected. Andrew, Mom and Daniel moved like ghosts, sleeping in different locations each night, scavenging from houses that had already been picked over by earlier survivors. The emotional weight of losing the compound hung over them. Daniel barely spoke, consumed by guilt for running. Mom seemed to age years overnight, her movements slow and pained. And Andrew felt himself hardening, becoming something colder and more ruthless than the man who'd pulled baggage at the airport 6 weeks ago. On day 47, they encountered a familiar face, Sarah, the young woman who'd led them to the gated community. She was alone, filthy, borderline feral. When she saw Andrew, she started laughing, a broken, painful sound. "You," she said. "You promised us safety. You led us right to Harris." "I didn't know." Andrew started. "Didn't know. Didn't care, more like. You collected us like supplies, then ran when things got hard." She spat at his feet. "My daughter was at that compound, 8 years old. Now she's in Harris's labor camp, and I'll never see her again." The words hit like bullets. Andrew tried to respond, but Sarah was already gone, disappearing into the woods, with nothing but hatred fueling her. That night, around a small fire hidden in a ravine, Daniel finally broke. "She's right, you know. We should have fought harder. Should have died defending those people." "And what good would dying have done?" Andrew asked. "At least we'd have our honor. Honor's a luxury. We're past luxuries now." They argued for an hour, their voices rising despite the danger of attracting infected. Finally, exhausted, they fell silent. In the morning, Daniel was gone. He'd left a note. "I can't run anymore. Going back to try to rescue them. Don't follow." Andrew and Mom didn't follow. They continued north, just the two of them now, heading deeper into the mountains. The temperature was dropping as November arrived. Winter was coming, and with it a whole new category of survival challenges. On day 52, they found salvation. A fire watchtower 3 miles from the nearest road, elevated 40 feet off the ground with a 360-degree view. The cabin at the top was small but intact, with solar panels that still generated minimal power. Evidence suggested someone had lived here after the outbreak, but that person was gone now, either dead or moved on. "This is it," Andrew said, staring at the watchtower. "This is where we make our stand." They spent a week fortifying the position. The watchtower's ladder could be pulled up, making it virtually immune to infected. The solar panels powered a radio and a small heater. They stockpiled firewood from surrounding forest. And critically, they found a spring 200 yards away that provided fresh water. It wasn't comfortable. The cabin was barely large enough for 2 people, but it was safe. And safety had become the highest virtue. As November deepened, they established a routine: sunrise, check the perimeter for threats. Morning, scavenge the surrounding area for supplies. Afternoon, maintenance and fortification work. Evening, radio monitoring and planning. Night, sleep in shifts, one person always watching. The infected were less prevalent here in the mountains, but they weren't absent. Andrew encountered them during scavenging runs, solitary wanderers who'd somehow made it this far north, slower in the cold, but no less dangerous. He learned to spot them from the watchtower, their jerky gait, the way they moved without the hesitation or caution of living things. Winter arrived in earnest around day 60. Snow fell, first light dustings, then heavy storms that buried the mountain forest under white. The infected struggled in snow. Their mechanical movements weren't adapted for navigating deep powder, but the living struggled too. Firewood became critical. Food supplies dwindled. The cold was a constant enemy. On day 67, Mom got sick. It started as a cough, then escalated to fever and chest congestion. Andrew treated her with what limited medicine they had. Antibiotics he'd scavenged from an abandoned pharmacy weeks ago, aspirin for the fever, tea brewed from wild plants. But the sickness persisted, and he watched with growing terror as she weakened. "Andrew," she said one night, voice barely a whisper, "if I don't make it, don't talk like that. If I don't make it, I need you to promise me something. Don't give up. Don't become one of those people who just survives without living. Your father and I, we raised you to be better than that." "I promise, Mom." But the promise felt hollow. What was the point of living without purpose, without connection, without hope? Mom survived. Barely. It took 2 weeks, but the fever broke, and the cough subsided. She was weaker, frailer, but alive. And Andrew realized something during those 2 weeks. He'd been prepared to lose her, had already started grieving. The realization that she might actually die had broken something open inside him, some protective shell he'd built. "I need to go back," he told her once she could sit up. "Back to the compound. Harris took those people because I led them there. I need to make it right." Mom studied him with clear eyes. "You'll die." "Maybe, but if I don't try, I'm already dead. Just breathing." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Your father would understand, Hel. He'd probably insist on coming with you, bad heart and all." She smiled. "I suppose that's where you get your stupid stubbornness. You're not coming. I know I'd just slow you down." She squeezed his hand. "But Andrew, come back, please." He left on day 85, 3 months after day 1. Winter was deep now, the mountains locked in snow. He wore every layer of clothing he owned, carried a hunting rifle and pistol, and moved south with grim determination. The journey took 5 days, longer than the northbound escape had taken, but he was moving more carefully, scouting ahead, avoiding not just infected but the living. Harris's new order had expanded, claiming more territory, absorbing more survivor groups. Andrew saw their patrols twice, both times hiding until they passed. On day 90, he reached the compound, or what was left of it. Harris had transformed the industrial complex into a proper military installation. Watchtowers stood at each corner, floodlights swept the perimeter, armed guards patrolled in pairs, and in the center, flying from a makeshift flagpole, was a black banner with a white fist. The new order's symbol. Andrew watched from the tree line, studying patterns. Guards changed every 4 hours, patrols followed predictable routes, and at night the compound quieted, most people sleeping, only skeleton security remaining. He spent 3 days observing before making his move. Not an assault, that would be suicide, but reconnaissance, infiltration, sabotage. He was one man against a fortified position, but he had advantages. He knew the compound's layout, he had nothing to lose, and he'd become something dangerous in these 3 months. On his 4th night watching, Andrew slipped past the perimeter during a guard change. He moved through shadows, avoiding the floodlights, heading for the storage building where Harris kept most of his supplies. The plan was simple: set fires, create chaos, give the imprisoned survivors a chance to escape in the confusion. He'd just reached the storage building when a voice spoke behind him. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Andrew spun, bringing up his rifle. Colonel Harris stood 10 feet away, flanked by 2 guards. He wasn't armed, didn't need to be. "Andrew Hoskins," Harris said conversationally. "The man who ran when things got tough. What brings you back?" "I'm taking back what's mine." "Is that so?" Harris gestured, and more guards emerged from the darkness. 8, 10, 12. Andrew lost count. "I admire the courage. Stupidity, but courage. Put the rifle down." Andrew calculated odds and found them impossible. He lowered the rifle. "You could have been part of this," Harris said, almost regretfully. "Could have helped build something real. Instead you chose chaos. Well, chaos has consequences." The guards moved in, disarming Andrew, forcing him to his knees. Harris walked closer, studying him like a specimen. "I'm not going to kill you," Harris said. "That would be wasteful. You're going to work, hauling supplies, building walls, whatever I need, and when you're not working, you're going to think about how your choices led you here. Maybe eventually you'll understand that my way is the only way civilization survives." They threw Andrew into a storage container that had been converted into a makeshift cell. Inside were others, including Daniel, who looked like he'd been beaten regularly, and several people from the original compound. "You came back," Daniel said, voice filled with exhausted irony. "Wish you hadn't." "Me too," Andrew admitted. Day 105. Life in Harris's labor camp was brutal. 14-hour workdays, minimal food, beatings for anyone who complained or resisted. Andrew hauled supplies, dug trenches, built fortifications. His hands, already calloused from airport work, developed new layers of damage. His body, lean from months of survival, became skeletal, but he learned things. The compound held about 80 people, 40 of Harris's core followers, 40 labor conscripts. Resources were actually better than Andrew expected. Harris's systematic looting had stockpiled massive quantities of food and supplies, and security, while tight, wasn't perfect. Guards got lazy on overnight shifts. Patrol patterns had gaps. The storage containers' locks were old and pickable. Most importantly, Andrew learned he wasn't the only one planning escape. A woman named Carla, who'd been a locksmith before the outbreak, was working on a way to defeat the container locks. A teenager named Jamie knew the patrol schedules by heart. And Daniel, despite his beaten appearance, had been mapping the compound's weak points. "We get one chance," Andrew told them in whispered conversations during work breaks. "We coordinate, we move together, and we run fast. No heroics, no stopping to fight. Just escape and scatter." They planned for 2 weeks, refining details, recruiting others who were desperate enough to risk it. The date, day 120, during the new moon when darkness would be deepest. But plans in the apocalypse rarely survived contact with reality. On day 117, 3 days before the planned escape, infected attacked the compound in unprecedented numbers. Not a random horde, but a coordinated assault, hundreds of them, including those fast-moving variants, hitting all sides simultaneously. Harris's guards opened fire, but the infected kept coming. They overwhelmed the southern wall, breached the perimeter, poured into the compound like a flood. Chaos erupted, screaming, gunfire, the horrible sounds of people dying. Andrew found himself unlocked from his container by a panicking guard who'd needed more hands to fight. He grabbed a rifle from a dead soldier and started shooting, not to help Harris, but to survive. Beside him, Daniel and the others did the same. The infected were everywhere. Andrew saw Harris trying to coordinate a defense, saw guards falling back toward the administrative building, saw the black banner with its white fist get torn down and trampled. The New Order's fortress was crumbling. "Now!" Andrew shouted to the other prisoners. "We go now!" They ran for the northern fence, the weakest point in the perimeter. Behind them, Harris was screaming orders that no one followed. The infected surged through the compound, and Andrew saw with cold clarity that the New Order was finished. They reached the fence and started climbing. Some made it over. Others were pulled down by infected. Andrew grabbed Daniel's arm and hauled him up, then dropped to the other side into snow and darkness. They ran. 10 people had started the escape. 7 made it to the tree line. By dawn, only 5 remained together. Andrew, Daniel, Carla, Jamie, and a woman named Lisa who'd been a teacher. They kept running, putting miles between themselves and the compound. Behind them, the sounds of battle faded. Whether anyone survived, Harris, the guards, the other prisoners, Andrew didn't know and couldn't spare the energy to care. On day 122, they finally stopped running. They'd reached a rural area northeast of the lake, scattered farms and forest. They were exhausted, half frozen, running on nothing but survival instinct. "What now?" Jamie asked. Andrew looked at the group, these broken, traumatized people who'd survived horrors that should have killed them. "Now we figure out how to live instead of just surviving." 140. The farm they found was small, a 2-story house, a barn, 20 acres of snow-covered fields. The previous owners were gone, their fate unclear. But they'd left behind something precious, a root cellar stocked with preserved vegetables, a barn full of tools and equipment, and a propane tank that still held fuel. The 5 survivors moved in and began the process of transformation. Not just surviving, but building. They cleaned the house, established routines, started planning for spring planting. Carla's lock-picking skills transferred to general mechanical work. Jamie's youth made him resilient and adaptable. Lisa brought educational structure, teaching the skills they'd need, and Daniel stopped talking about honor and sacrifice, started focusing on practical work. Andrew found himself changing too. The hardness that had developed over 4 months began to soften, not into weakness, but into something more nuanced. He started thinking long-term. Crops they could plant, livestock they might find, ways to generate power. On day 150, they made contact with another survivor group, A family of 4 holed up in a church 3 miles away. The family was wary, but not hostile. They agreed to trade information about the area for medical supplies the farm group had found. It was the start of something. Slowly, carefully, other survivors emerged. A couple living in a fortified cabin. A man who'd been a veterinarian. An elderly woman who knew traditional preservation techniques. Not a town, not even a proper community, but a network of people helping each other survive. Winter released its grip grudgingly. February brought slightly warmer days. March brought the first signs of thaw. And in April, as spring truly arrived, they planted their first crops, potatoes, beans, squash. Simple foods that could sustain them through another winter. Andrew made one final trip in early May, back to the watchtower where he'd left Mom. The journey took 3 days, his heart in his throat the entire time, terrified of what he'd find. But Mom was alive. Thinner, weaker, but alive. She'd survived the winter alone through sheer stubbornness, eating preserved food and melted snow, keeping the fire going, waiting. When she saw Andrew, she didn't say anything. Just held him for a long moment, then pulled back and studied his face. "You look different," she finally said. "I am different." Better? Andrew thought about it. He'd seen things no person should see, done things that would haunt him forever, lost pieces of himself he'd never get back. But he'd also found something, not redemption, not peace, but purpose. "I don't know, but I'm here. I came back." "That's enough," Mom said. They returned to the farm together, arriving on day 175. The crops were growing. The survivor network was expanding. Life continued, not the life they'd known, but life nonetheless. Day 206 months. That's how long it had been since Andrew's world ended in the airport freight hangar. 6 months since Ray Tomlinson had charged at him with black eyes and clicking teeth. 6 months since civilization had collapsed and the dead had started walking. Andrew stood in the farm's fields on a warm June morning, watching the crops grow. Potato plants were flourishing. Bean vines climbed makeshift trellises. In the barn, they'd successfully raised chickens from eggs they'd found at an abandoned hatchery. It wasn't paradise. Every day still held the threat of infected or hostile survivors. But it was something. Mom worked in the garden near the house. Teaching Lisa's daughter the names of vegetables, Daniel repaired the barn's roof. No longer the broken man from Harris's prison. Carla had turned the basement into a workshop, tinkering with solar panels salvaged from various locations. Jamie kept watch from the house's second floor, a rifle across his lap, scanning the horizon. The survivor network had grown to 38 people across 7 locations. They traded goods, shared information, even helped each other with defense when threatened. It wasn't society, not yet, but it was the foundation from which society might someday grow. In the distance, Andrew could see smoke rising from Atlanta. The city still burned in places, still harbored who knew how many infected. But each week, there seemed to be fewer. The infected were durable but not immortal. They could be killed, and without new infections to replace them, the survivors had learned caution. Their numbers slowly declined. Andrew had heard rumors of larger communities forming to the north, of military units that had maintained cohesion, of scientists working on understanding the infection rumors, nothing more. But they suggested that humanity might not be finished. He thought about the people he'd lost, Ray, Marcus, Derek, the families at the gated community, countless others whose names he'd never learned. He thought about the choices he'd made, the people he'd failed to save, the compromises survival had demanded. There was no redemption in this new world, no way to balance the scales or achieve absolution, but there was tomorrow, and the chance to make it better than today. "Andrew!" Mom called from the garden. "Come look at this!" He walked over, feet crunching on gravel, and found her holding something small and green, a tomato plant volunteer, sprouting from where seeds had scattered last year. "Thought all the Nightshade family had died over winter," she said, smiling, "but life finds a way." Andrew looked at the small plant, thinking about everything it represented: resilience, adaptation, the stubborn refusal to die. He thought about his father's advice: take care of the people right in front of you. He thought about the watchtower, the compound, the flight south. He thought about Ray Tomlinson's clicking teeth and the sound of his skull breaking under the tow bar. "Yeah," Andrew said quietly, "life finds a way." That night he stood outside the farmhouse under a sky brilliant with stars. No light pollution anymore to dim them. The infected were quiet tonight, or perhaps just far away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: crops to tend, defenses to maintain, the constant vigilant survival required. But for now, for this moment, there was peace. Andrew thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago, the baggage handler who knew aircraft weight ratios and tug maintenance schedules, who'd worried about making his shift on time and what to get Mom for Christmas. That man was gone, transformed by fire and blood into someone harder, someone who'd made impossible choices and lived with their consequences. He thought about the tug. Memphis Belle, his faithful tractor that had hauled baggage for 12 years. He imagined it still sitting in some corner of the airport, abandoned, slowly rusting, a monument to a world that no longer existed. And he thought about what came next: not just survival, but rebuilding, not just enduring, but thriving, creating something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The apocalypse had taught Andrew Hoskins many things: that civilization was fragile, that humans could become monsters or heroes, that the line between survival and surrender was razor thin, that sometimes the bravest thing wasn't fighting but running, and sometimes the hardest thing was choosing who to save when you couldn't save everyone. But most importantly, it had taught him this: the world could end, society could collapse, the dead could walk. And still, somehow, life found a way. In the morning, he'd wake and tend the crops. He'd check the perimeter and coordinate with the other survivors. He'd continue the endless work of building something better than what had been lost. But tonight, he allowed himself to remember the man he'd been, to grieve for the world that was gone, and to find some small measure of hope in the fact that he and humanity had survived 6 months, 200 days, a lifetime measured in heartbeats and gunshots and the quiet moments between crises. Andrew Hoskins had driven his metaphorical tug into the swarm. He'd faced the chaos, made his stand, survived when so many others hadn't. The costs had been terrible, the choices impossible, the losses immeasurable, but he'd survived, and tomorrow he'd survive again. That would have to be enough. The next stories. The morning fog rolled through San Francisco like it always did, thick and cold enough to bead on Christopher's work jacket as he walked down Washington Street toward the cable car barn, 6:15 a.m., same as every weekday for the past 11 years. His steel-toed boots knew every crack in the sidewalk, every uneven seam where the hill pitched steep enough to make tourists gasp. The Nob Hill barn sat tucked between the Grand Hotels and the California Street line, a brick fortress that smelled like grease and history. Christopher Hayes, Chris to everyone except his mother, was 34 years old, average height, built solid from years of wrenching on machinery that weighed more than most cars. His hands were scarred and calloused, fingernails perpetually outlined in black, no matter how hard he scrubbed. Dark hair cut short because long hair was a liability around moving cables. He wore the same thing every day: jeans, work boots, and whatever clean shirt he could find, usually a faded grey Henley under his reflective safety vest. The cable car system was older than his grandfather. Miles of steel rope running in continuous loops beneath the streets, pulled by massive wheels in powerhouses that never stopped turning. His job was to keep it all working. Inspect the grips that clamped onto the cables, maintain the braking systems, replace worn sheaves, and keep the tracks clear. It was skilled labor, union work, the kind of job that paid enough for a studio apartment in the Tenderloin and occasional nights out with Marco. His partner of 3 years, a pastry chef who worked the morning shift at a bakery near Fisherman's Wharf. They'd texted last night about dinner plans. Thai food. The place on Clement Street they both loved. Marco would be up by now, probably elbow deep in croissant dough, cursing in Portuguese when the lamination didn't cooperate. Christopher pulled open the barn's side door and stepped into the cavernous space. The smell hit him immediately. Machine oil, metal, the particular scent of brake pads and worn rope. Overhead lights flickered on automatically, illuminating the 3 cable cars parked on the maintenance tracks. The building's high ceiling created echoes. Every footstep, every dropped tool rang out in the early morning quiet. "Morning," he called out, his voice bouncing off brick walls plastered with safety posters and union notices. No response. Weird. Danny Morrison, the shift foreman, was always here before him. Danny was one of those guys who showed up at 5:30 regardless of when his shift actually started, making coffee in the break room, reviewing the day's work orders with obsessive attention to detail. Christopher walked past the number 17 car, California Street line, due for a full brake inspection today, and headed toward the back offices. The break room door was open, light spilling out. He could hear the coffee maker gurgling, almost finished with its cycle. "Danny!" The foreman stood at the window, staring out at nothing. Didn't turn around. Just stood there, shoulders rigid, one hand pressed flat against the glass. "Hey boss, you good?" Danny Morrison was 56, weathered face mapped with broken capillaries from decades of working outdoors in San Francisco's punishing Weather Marine Corps tattoo on his forearm, fading green anchor, married with 2 grown kids who never visited. He taught Christopher everything about cable car mechanics, patient instruction mixed with caustic humor that made 12-hour shifts bearable. Now he just stood there, breathing wrong. Too shallow, too fast. Christopher moved closer, concern prickling up his spine. "Danny, you feeling okay? You need me to call someone?" The foreman's head twitched, a small, sharp movement like something had stung him. His shoulders hunched forward and his breathing got worse. Rapid, wet gasps that didn't sound right at all. "Seriously, man, I'm calling 911. Danny spun around. Christopher took a reflexive step back, his boot heel catching on the break room's threshold. The foreman's face was wrong. Not sick wrong, not hungover wrong. Something worse. His skin had gone grey-white, filmed with sweat that looked too thick, almost oily. His eyes were the worst part, pupils contracted to pinpoints, the surrounding iris so bloodshot the whites had vanished into raw red. "Danny?" The foreman's mouth opened. His lips were cracked and bleeding, peeling away from his gums. When he breathed out, Christopher smelled something rotten, like meat left in a hot car. "I think you need a hospital." Christopher kept his voice calm, the way you talk to scared animals or people in shock. "Let me call an ambulance, get you checked out." Danny lunged. Not stumbled, not collapsed, lunged. His hands came up clawed, reaching for Christopher's face with fingers that trembled and seized. A low sound came from his throat, something between a moan and a growl that had no human intelligence behind it. Christopher jerked backward into the hallway, his shoulder slamming into the doorframe. Training kicked in, 11 years of safety protocols, hazard awareness drilled into every mechanic who worked around moving machinery, get distance, assess the threat, call for help. "What the fuck, Danny?" The foreman followed him into the hallway, movements jerky and wrong. He walked like his joints didn't quite work, like someone had replaced his muscles with badly calibrated springs. Drool ran down his chin, mixed with dark blood from his ruined lips. Christopher's mind raced through possibilities: stroke, seizure, some kind of drug reaction. Danny had never touched anything stronger than beer, but people hid addictions, and this looked like... what? PCP? Bath salts? He'd seen videos online of people on that stuff, the terrifying strength and complete disconnect from pain. "Danny, I need you to stop. Just stop moving, okay? I'm gonna get help." The foreman lunged again, faster this time. His hand caught Christopher's vest, fingers closing on the reflective fabric with surprising strength. Christopher grabbed Danny's wrist on instinct, tried to push him away, but the older man's grip didn't budge. His other hand reached for Christopher's throat. They grappled in the narrow hallway, Christopher's back pressed against the concrete wall, Danny's face inches from his own. The rotten smell intensified. The foreman's mouth gaped open, teeth bared, snapping at Christopher's face like he wanted to bite. Christopher got his forearm up under Danny's chin, levering the foreman's head back. The man's strength was insane, all of it focused on getting closer, getting his mouth on exposed skin. This wasn't a fight, it was an attack, predatory and mindless. "Danny, stop!" The foreman didn't respond. Didn't even seem to hear. His pinpoint pupils never focused, just stared through Christopher at nothing at all. Christopher hooked his leg behind Danny's knee and pushed hard, using leverage more than strength. They both went down, hitting the concrete floor with an impact that knocked the air from Christopher's lungs. He rolled, scrambled to his feet, and ran. Behind him, Danny was already getting up. No pause for pain, no grunt of effort. Just that horrible jerky motion as he rose to his feet and followed. The main barn floor stretched ahead, filled with shadows and equipment. Christopher's mind spun through options. Lock himself in the parts cage? Call the cops? Get outside and flag down someone for help? But what if Danny followed him out to the street, attacked a pedestrian? A scream cut through the barn, high and sharp. Coming from the California Street entrance, Christopher spun toward the sound. Through the open bay doors, he could see morning light and fog, and a figure stumbling into the barn. The new intern, Ashley something, college kid doing a summer program with the transit authority. She wore her bright orange safety vest and carried a clipboard, looked maybe 20 years old at most. She was screaming because someone was chasing her, not someone, multiple someones. 3 people in various states of disarray, moving with that same jerky wrongness as Danny. A woman in a business suit with her hair half torn out, a homeless guy Christopher recognized from his usual spot on Powell Street, shopping cart abandoned somewhere behind him. A jogger in expensive running gear, one shoe missing, his bare foot leaving bloody prints on the concrete. All of them had those same pinpoint pupils, that same grey-white skin, that same focused hunger. Ashley saw Christopher and ran toward him. "Help! Oh God, please help! Get to the break room!" Christopher shouted. "Lock the door!" But she didn't make it. The jogger was fast, despite his ruined foot. He caught her from behind, hands clamping on her shoulders, pulling her down. Ashley's clipboard clattered across the floor. She screamed again, high and terrified, as the jogger's head dipped down toward her neck. Christopher grabbed the first thing his hands found, a 2-foot spanner wrench, solid steel, heavy enough to be a weapon. He ran toward them, yelling, hoping noise would distract the attacker. The jogger's head came up, Ashley's blood on his mouth, and Christopher swung. The spanner connected with the side of the jogger's skull, with a sound like a wooden bat hitting a watermelon. The man went down hard, collapsing onto the concrete. Christopher expected him to stay down. Nobody took a hit like that and kept moving. The jogger started getting up. Jesus Christ! Christopher grabbed Ashley's arm, hauled her to her feet. Her neck was bleeding, not arterial, but bad enough teeth marks in the muscle above her collarbone. "Come on, we have to—" The businesswoman reached them. Christopher swung again, caught her in the shoulder. She stumbled but didn't fall, just adjusted her trajectory and kept coming. Behind her, the homeless guy was closing in, and behind him, Danny emerged from the hallway, attracted by the noise. The parts cage! Christopher pulled Ashley toward the chain-link enclosure at the back of the barn. It was meant to secure expensive equipment overnight. Floor-to-ceiling fencing with a padlocked gate. If they could get inside, lock it behind them. Ashley's weight suddenly increased. She was flagging, legs unsteady. Christopher looked down and saw blood running down her chest, soaking into her orange vest, too much blood. The bite had gone deeper than he'd thought. "Stay with me," he said, half dragging her now. "Just a little further." They reached the cage. Christopher fumbled his keys from his belt clip. He had the master set every lock in the building and found the right one. His hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in the lock. Behind them the attackers were closing in. The jogger back on his feet despite his shattered skull, brain matter visible through split skin. Still moving. Still coming. The lock clicked open. Christopher shoved Ashley inside and followed, slamming the gate shut behind them. His fingers worked the lock closed just as hands hit the chain link, rattling the whole structure. 4 faces pressed against the fence, mouths open, hands reaching through the gaps. Danny was one of them. 11 years working together, all those shared morning coffees and complaining about management, reduced to this, a thing that wanted to tear Christopher apart. "What's happening?" Ashley's voice came out weak, thready. She'd collapsed against a rack of brake assemblies, one hand pressed to her neck wound. "What's wrong with them?" "I don't know." Christopher pulled out his phone, hands still shaking. No signal. He tried again, moving around the cage, looking for bars. Nothing. "Fuck. Okay, I need to think. It hurts." Ashley's hand fell away from her neck. The bleeding had slowed, but she looked pale, shock settling in. "Why did that guy bite me? Why would—" "I'm getting you help." Christopher tried 911 anyway. The call wouldn't connect, just a recorded message about high call volume. "Please stay on the line." He hung up and tried again. Same result. Outside the cage, the attackers pressed against the fence, hands reaching, mouths working. They didn't get tired, didn't stop, just kept trying to get in with patient, mindless persistence. Christopher's mind raced. This wasn't isolated. The woman, the homeless guy, the jogger, all attacking at once. And Danny had been sick before any of them showed up, standing at that window like he was waiting for something. The news last night had mentioned something about a chemical spill near UCSF, one of their research labs. A containment issue, rapidly contained, no danger to the public, they'd lied. Or they'd been wrong. Either way, something was spreading. Fast. "I need to get out of here." Ashley tried to stand, made it halfway up before her legs gave out. She slid back down, leaving a blood smear on the brake assembly rack. "My parents, I need to call them." "Hey, just stay still, okay? Help is coming." Christopher kept his voice steady, lying through his teeth, because what else could he do? Tell her that 911 wasn't working, that something was fundamentally wrong with the entire city, that she might be infected. The word crystallized in his mind. The bite on her neck, the blood, the way infections spread through bodily fluids. He looked at his own hands, checking for cuts, any opening where her blood might have gotten in. His palms were clean, a few old scars, but nothing fresh, nothing that would allow transmission. If it was transmission, if this was biological at all, and not some weird chemical thing, or... Ashley's breathing changed, became rapid, shallow, the same pattern Danny had shown. "How you feeling?" Christopher asked, already knowing the answer. "Hot. I'm really hot." She pulled at her vest, trying to get it off. Her movements were getting jerky, uncoordinated, and my neck. It doesn't hurt anymore. Shouldn't it hurt? It should. Pain was the body's warning system. When pain stopped, but the injury remained, that meant nerve damage or shock or something worse. Christopher watched her pupils. Still normal, still responsive when he waved his hand in front of her face. But that could change, based on what he'd seen with Danny. Symptoms progressed fast. Minutes, not hours. He had to make a decision. Stay in this cage with a potentially infected person in an enclosed space, or, what? Fight his way out past 4 attackers, leave her here, try to make it to Marco at Fisherman's Wharf? The bridges would be jammed. He'd seen disaster movies, knew how fast infrastructure collapsed when everyone tried to evacuate at once. Marco. Christopher tried calling his cell. The call connected but went straight to voicemail. He texted, "Something wrong, stay inside, lock doors, I love you." Send. The message sat there with a single bar, trying to push through overloaded networks. Christopher. Ashley's voice had changed, flatter, distant. I feel wrong. He turned back to her. Her eyes had gone glassy, unfocused. Sweat filmed her skin, that same oily sheen Danny had shown. Her breathing had become those wet, rapid gasps. Ashley, I need you to stay over there. Don't move, okay? She tilted her head, the gesture bird-like and wrong. When she looked at him, her pupils were contracting, pinpoints of black in hazel irises swimming in red. Christopher gripped the spanner wrench tighter and backed away, putting equipment racks between them. The cage suddenly felt too small. Outside, the 4 attackers continued their patient assault on the fence. Inside, Ashley's transformation continued. She stood up. Didn't struggle this time, just rose smoothly despite her injuries. Her head swiveled toward Christopher, and that flat, hungry look entered her eyes. The same look Danny had, the same look they all had. Ashley, don't. Christopher held up one hand, spanner ready in the other. Fight it, whatever this is. You can fight it. She took a step toward him, then another. Her movements had that jerky quality now, muscles firing wrong. Drool began to run from her slack mouth. Christopher had maybe 5 seconds to decide, try to subdue her without lethal force, or accept that whatever made someone a person was gone, replaced by this thing that only wanted to bite and infect and spread. He thought of Marco, thought of fighting through an entire city of these things to reach him, thought of dying here in this cage because he hesitated. When Ashley lunged, Christopher didn't. He sidestepped, used her momentum against her, and brought the spanner down on the back of her skull. The impact jarred his arms. She went down, and he hit her again and again, until she stopped moving. His stomach heaved. He turned away and vomited into a corner of the cage, bringing up coffee and bile. His hands shook so violently he dropped the spanner. It clanged on concrete, the sound echoing through the barn. Outside the cage, the attackers' pace increased. The sound of violence excited them. Christopher wiped his mouth and forced himself to look at what he'd done. Ashley lay motionless in a spreading pool of blood, 20 years old, doing a summer internship, dead because she came to work this morning and someone bit her. No, not someone. Something. He picked up the spanner. His hands had stopped shaking. That worried him more than the tremors had. Some part of him had already accepted this new reality, adapted to it, decided that survival meant violence. 11 years as a cable car mechanic hadn't prepared him for killing people, but it had taught him about mechanical systems, about leverage and stress points and how things broke. It had given him knowledge of every tunnel, every maintenance access, every hidden space in San Francisco's cable car infrastructure. And it had made his hands strong. Those would have to be enough. Christopher surveyed his resources. The parts cage contained brake assemblies, sheave wheels, sections of cable rope, various tools. Against the back wall stood a rolling tool cabinet with everything from screwdrivers to power drills. A first aid kit hung near the gate, useless for what killed people here, but potentially useful for the injuries he'd sustained getting out. His phone buzzed. 1 bar of signal wavering, the text to Marco had gone through, and a reply came back. What's going on? Helicopter over wharf, people screaming outside. Christopher typed fast. Outbreak, something bad. People attacking. Stay inside, barricade door. Don't let anyone bite you. I'm coming. The reply came seconds later. Can't stay. Building on fire. Going to emergency shelter at Pier 39. No, Pier 39 would be a madhouse. Thousands of tourists and residents all trying to get to the same place, and if this infection spread through bites... His phone lost signal before he could respond. He tried calling, texting. Nothing went through. The single bar of reception had vanished, like it never existed. Christopher looked at the 4 attackers outside his cage, studied their movements, their behavior. They pressed against the fence wherever he moved, tracking him by sight. Sound also got their attention. When he'd hit Ashley, they'd responded to the noise. But they didn't strategize, didn't try to climb or find a weak point in the fence. They just pushed forward with mindless persistence. Animals! Not people anymore, but animals driven by a single imperative: bite, infect, spread. If they could be treated like animals, they could be predicted, exploited. Christopher grabbed a handful of washers from a bin, thick steel rings used for securing bolts, and threw them hard at the far end of the barn. They clattered across the floor, bouncing and ringing against concrete. All 4 attackers turned toward the sound, shambling in that direction now. He unlocked the gate and slipped out, moving quiet and fast toward the main entrance. Behind him, the attackers realized he'd moved and turned back, but he had 30 feet of distance now, enough. The California Street entrance opened onto a wide bay, where cable cars normally loaded for their morning runs. Christopher stopped at the threshold and stared out at Nob Hill. The intersection of California and Powell Streets was chaos. Cars crashed into each other, drivers slumped over wheels or climbing out to attack pedestrians. A cable car sat halfway up the hill, its grip operator gone, the car slowly sliding backward toward the intersection as gravity overcame its brakes. People ran in every direction, screaming. More people chased them, moving with that distinctive jerky gait. The Mark Hopkins Hotel across the street had smoke billowing from a third-floor window. Someone in a doorman's uniform stumbled down the front steps, face covered in blood, chasing a woman in a bathrobe. It wasn't isolated. It wasn't contained. The whole city was falling apart. Christopher ducked back inside the barn, heart hammering. He couldn't go out there, couldn't just run through that chaos and expect to make it 10 blocks, let alone all the way to Fisherman's Wharf. He needed a plan, needed supplies, needed a vehicle. Something that could move through streets clogged with abandoned cars and panicking people. His eyes fell on cable car number 17, California Street line, due for maintenance. He knew every inch of its mechanics, every piece of its construction. It was 6 tons of steel, wood and brass, built to climb 40-degree grades and carry 50 passengers. It could also push through obstacles that would stop a normal car. The problem was getting it out of the barn and onto the cable. Cable cars didn't have engines. They clamped onto a continuously moving underground cable and rode it up and down the hills. Without the cable, it was just a very heavy box on rails. But the California Street cable was still running. Christopher could hear its distinctive hum through the floor, feel the faint vibration. Whatever had happened at UCSF, whatever had triggered this outbreak, it hadn't shut down the powerhouse. The wheels kept turning, the cable kept moving at a constant 9.5 miles per hour. 9.5 miles per hour straight down California Street toward the ferry building and the waterfront. From there he could head north toward the wharf on foot, assuming the streets were even passable. It was insane. It was also his only chance. Christopher ran to the tool cabinet and started grabbing supplies. Heavy work gloves, safety goggles, cable clamps, wire cutters, a battery-powered impact wrench. He threw everything into a canvas equipment bag, added the first aid kit, then raided the break room for water bottles and anything edible. Danny's lunch bag sat on the counter. Christopher tried not to think about Danny as he dumped out a sandwich and an apple into his pack. 4 bottles of water, a roll of electrical tape, a flashlight, a box cutter. Not much, but it would have to do. The spanner wrench went into his belt loop, heavy and cold against his hip. Back in the barn, the attackers had found him again. Danny and the other 3 shambled toward him across the open floor. More figures appeared in the California Street entrance. A tourist couple in matching Giants jackets, both with that grey-white skin and those terrible pinpoint pupils. Christopher ignored them and focused on cable car 17. The pre-trip inspection he'd planned to do this morning would save his life now. He knew the brakes were solid, the grip mechanism was freshly greased, and the emergency release functioned perfectly. He climbed aboard, settled into the grip operator's position, and gripped the lever that controlled the cable clamp. The bar felt familiar in his hands, worn smooth by decades of use. Every cable car had slight differences, little quirks operators learned through experience. 17's grip was stiff. You had to really lean into it to get full clamping pressure. The track leading out to California Street sat empty. Normally, a brakeman would throw the switch to connect the barn track to the main line, but Christopher didn't have a brakeman. He'd have to do it himself, which meant leaving the car, throwing the switch, then getting back aboard before the attackers reached him. He looked at the approaching crowd, 8 of them now, shambling closer, more appearing at both entrances. No time for careful planning. Christopher jumped down from the car and sprinted to the track switch. It was a heavy piece of machinery, resistant to casual movement. He grabbed the lever with both hands and hauled. The switch groaned, resisted, then suddenly gave way with a clang that echoed through the barn. The attackers responded to the noise, converging on his position. Christopher ran back to the car and leaped aboard. His hand found the grip lever and pulled. The mechanism engaged with a solid chunk, metal teeth biting into the continuously moving cable beneath the street. The car lurched forward, wheels squealing on rusty track as it began to move. Too slow. The tourists in Giant's jackets reached the car, hands grasping for the running board. Christopher grabbed the spanner and swung, catching one of them across the face. The impact sent him sprawling, but his partner kept coming, actually managing to climb onto the running board. As the car gained speed, Christopher kicked him in the chest. The man flew backward, landed hard on the concrete floor. The car was moving faster now, pulled along by the underground cable, emerging from the barn into grey morning light. California Street opened up ahead, a corridor of carnage running downhill toward downtown. The cable car's bell rang automatically as it hit the main track. A cheerful clang, 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 completely at odds with the screaming chaos all around. Christopher gripped the brake lever with one hand, grip control with the other, and drove into hell. The grade was steep here, Nob Hill at its most dramatic. Without power to the grip, the car would pick up speed, break shoes screaming against the rails. With full grip, it moved at exactly 9.5 miles per hour, no matter the grade, the same speed as the cable. That speed felt painfully slow when the world was ending. A man ran into the street ahead, normal human panic on his face, being chased by 3 attackers. Christopher rang the bell frantically, 2 quick pulls on the cord, the traditional warning signal. The man looked up, saw 6 tons of cable car bearing down, and dove aside. The 3 attackers didn't. They walked straight into the car's path. The impact wasn't dramatic. The car just kept moving at its steady 9.5 miles per hour, and the 3 bodies went down under the wheels. Christopher felt the bumps through the floorboards, felt resistance as the car rolled over human bodies like they were speed bumps. He gripped the control lever harder and didn't look back. Taylor Street, Mason Street, Powell Street, where the California and Powell lines intersected, the Mark Hopkins on one side, the Fairmont on the other, both grand hotels now vomiting refugees onto the street. The intersection was clogged with abandoned cars, but Christopher knew this route intimately. He released the grip slightly, let the car slow, then steered around a jackknife taxi by using the brake to control descent while the cable pulled him forward. A woman jumped onto the running board, face bloody but eyes clear, human desperation in her voice. "Please, please help, they're right behind me." Christopher looked past her and saw them coming, a dozen at least, pouring out of a hotel side entrance. He reached out, grabbed the woman's hand, and hauled her onto the car. "Get to the back, hold on to something." She scrambled to the rear platform as Christopher released the brake and pulled full grip. The car lurched forward, picking up speed. Behind them, the attackers gave chase but couldn't match the cable's steady pull. More people flagged him down at Grant Street. Christopher didn't stop. couldn't stop. The grip mechanism was designed to clamp the cable continuously. If he released it here on this grade, the car would roll backward and he'd lose momentum. Once you let go of the cable, you had to have clear track ahead to catch it again. Chinatown blurred past. Red lanterns swung wildly in morning wind, their festival cheer grotesque against the screaming chaos. A group of teenagers had taken refuge on the roof of a produce market, throwing cabbages at attackers below. Smart kids, height was safety. "Where are you going?" The woman he'd picked up clutched the rear grab rail, face white with shock. "Fisherman's Wharf!" Christopher shouted over the bell and street noise. "You? I don't know. My husband. They got him." Her voice broke. "I'm sorry." And he was, genuinely, but there was no time for comfort. The car was approaching Kearney Street, and ahead he could see the intersection was completely blocked. A bus had crashed into a streetlight, and the resulting pileup involved at least 6 cars, no way through. Christopher pulled the lever, releasing the grip. The car immediately began to roll backward, gravity taking over. He slammed the brake lever forward, and the shoes bit into the rails with a teeth-rattling screech. They slowed, stopped, teetered on the grade. Attackers were coming up the hill behind them, maybe 20 now, drawn by the noise. "We have to get off!" The woman was already moving, jumping down to the street. "Wait!" But she was gone, running west on Sacramento Street, disappearing into the maze of Chinatown alleys. Christopher looked at the pileup ahead, the mob behind, and made a decision cable cars couldn't go backward under power. The grip only worked in one direction, but they could roll. If he released the brake and steered carefully, gravity would take him back uphill to the Powell Street intersection, and from there he could switch to the Powell-Hyde line, which ran down to the waterfront via a different route. He released the brake. The car began rolling backward immediately, picking up speed fast. Christopher worked the brake lever like an instrument, applying just enough pressure to control descent without stopping. The Powell intersection rushed toward him, and he hit it going 15 miles per hour, way too fast, the car's wheels screaming as he cranked the brake harder. They stopped, with the rear platform perfectly positioned at the Powell Street switch, pure luck. Christopher jumped down, threw the switch manually, his 3rd time today, and each time felt like tempting fate, then leaped back aboard and grabbed the grip lever. The Powell-Hyde cable was still running. He pulled the grip, felt it engage, and the car lurched forward onto the new line. Russian Hill rose ahead, then the descent toward the waterfront. The Powell-Hyde line was steeper than California, 40-degree grades that made tourists gasp and reach for grab handles. Christopher had operated cars on this route hundreds of times, knew every curve and crosswalk. None of that knowledge prepared him for driving through the apocalypse. A police cruiser sat abandoned at Union Street, doors open, radio squawking. No sign of the officers. Fire consumed a Victorian house at Greenwich Street, flames billowing from broken windows while attackers wandered mindlessly through the smoke. A group of people had fortified the Coit Tower parking lot, using cars as barricades, and they screamed at Christopher as he passed. "Stop! Help us!" He couldn't. The grip was engaged. The car, moving at its steady 9.5 miles per hour, pulled inexorably downhill by machinery that didn't care about human suffering. Lombard Street. The croissant-shaped turns of the world's most crooked street were clogged with tourist cars whose drivers had fled or turned. Christopher held his breath as the cable car navigated the curves, wheels squealing, the heavy vehicle swaying alarmingly. For a terrifying moment he thought they'd derail, but the rails held, and they emerged onto the straightaway heading toward Fisherman's Wharf Bay Street. North Point, the smell of the ocean mixing with smoke, and something worse. Ghirardelli Square on the left, its famous sign partially obscured by smoke. Jefferson Street ahead, and beyond it, the wharf was on fire. Christopher's hands went numb on the controls. Multiple fires, actually, burning along the waterfront piers. Pier 39, where Marco had said he was heading, showed flames climbing from its ground floor, black smoke pouring into the morning sky. Hundreds of people crowded the pier's upper levels, trapped between fire and water. And there, winding through the streets, shambling across parking lots, a sea of attackers converging on the screaming crowds, Christopher released the grip and applied the brake. The car squealed to a stop at Jefferson Street, the last intersection before the waterfront tourist zone. His phone had signal again, one wavering bar. He tried calling Marco, straight to voicemail. He texted, "At Jefferson and Hyde. Where are you?" The reply took 30 seconds that felt like hours. "Trapped on pier, fire everywhere, can't get down." Christopher looked at the chaos ahead. Pier 39 was 4 blocks away, might as well have been 4 miles. The streets were packed with people and attackers, a writhing mass of panic and violence, no way through on foot, unless... His eyes tracked along the waterfront, following the path of the Powell-Hyde cable. It ran all the way down Hyde Street to the turnaround at Beach Street, right at the edge of the pier area. The cable was still running. He could feel it through the car's frame, that steady pull that never stopped. If he released the brake, the car would continue to the end of the line, but the turnaround was a manual operation. Required someone to push the car around on a rotating platform so it faced the opposite direction. He couldn't do that alone, and he couldn't leave the car there blocking the track. But he could release the cable grip before reaching the turnaround, let the car coast into the parking area, and use its momentum and weight as a battering ram to clear a path to the pier. 6 tons of steel. 40-degree grade, physics and gravity on his side. Christopher pulled the grip lever and the car began moving again. Jefferson Street, Beach Street, the turnaround visible ahead with its Victorian-era platform and tourist signage beyond it. The parking lot entrance and then open asphalt, leading to Pier 39's base. At the last possible moment, he released the grip. The cable let go with a chunk of disengaging metal, and suddenly the car was coasting free, subject only to momentum and the slight downward grade 20 miles per hour. 25. Christopher steered with the brake, using quick pumps to adjust direction rather than slow down. The car burst out of the turnaround area into the parking lot, scattering attackers like bowling pins. Bodies went down under the wheels or bounced off the heavy frame. The impact rattled Christopher's teeth. 30 miles per hour. Ahead, a crowd of normal people huddled against the pier's entrance, cut off by attackers on 3 sides. They saw the cable car coming and scattered. The attackers didn't. Christopher aimed straight for them. The impact was horrific. Bodies crumpled against the car's front deadwood, were dragged under the wheels, caught in the trucks, and crushed. Christopher felt every impact through the floor, heard bones breaking, saw blood spray across the brass fittings. He kept pressure on the brake, controlling the descent, steering toward the pier entrance. The car slowed, finally stopped 10 feet from Pier 39's main entrance. The brake shoes were smoking, filling the air with burning rubber smell. The running boards were slick with blood. Christopher grabbed his equipment bag and jumped down. His legs nearly gave out, adrenaline crash hitting hard. He steadied himself against the car and looked around. Maybe 15 people remained alive in the parking lot, refugees from the chaos. They stared at him with expressions mixing hope and horror. One woman was crying, clutching a small dog. An elderly man in tourist shorts had blood running down his leg from a bite on his calf. "Anyone who's not bitten, come with me," Christopher shouted. "Anyone who is bitten, I'm sorry, but you can't. It spreads through bites. You can't just leave us." The elderly man took a step forward, face red with anger and fear. "I'm sorry." Christopher meant it. But he'd seen Ashley transform in minutes, seen how this thing spread. Compassion would kill you faster than violence in this new world. Everyone else, if you want to live, we need to move now. The woman with the dog came first. Then a young couple in matching Cal Berkeley sweatshirts, a middle-aged man carrying a fire extinguisher like a weapon. 10 survivors total, minus the bitten ones who stood in shock as their certain death caught up with them. Christopher led them into Pier 39. The fire was concentrated on the north side, where restaurants and shops backed onto the loading docks. The main pier deck was clear but filling with smoke. Hundreds of people crowded the upper level, pressed against the railing overlooking the bay, trapped. Marco! Christopher screamed his partner's name until his throat hurt. Marco Oliveira. Nothing. Too much noise, too much chaos. He pushed through the crowd, equipment bag banging against his hip, searching faces blurred by smoke and tears. A hand grabbed his shoulder. Christopher spun, spanner wrench already coming up. Chris! Jesus! I thought you were dead! Marco looked like hell. Soot smeared his face, and his white pastry chef's uniform was torn and bloody, but his eyes were clear, human, alive. Christopher pulled him into a crushing hug. We have to get out of here. The whole pier's going to collapse. The ferries, Marco pointed to the bay. A few are still running, taking people to Sausalito and Tiburon. If we can get down to the dock. The main stairs led down to the boat docks, but they were packed with people fighting to get down. As Christopher watched, the crowd surged, and someone fell, was trampled, screaming. More people fell. The whole mass began to collapse on itself in a crush of panic. Side access, Christopher said. There were maintenance stairs used by dock workers and delivery people, hidden behind the facade of tourist shops. He'd seen them dozens of times on his routes, had once stopped for coffee while watching workers unload crab from fishing boats. He grabbed Marco's hand and pulled him through the crowd, shoving past people who grabbed at them desperately. The group of survivors he'd picked up tried to follow, but the press of bodies separated them. Christopher felt a moment of guilt, then crushed it. He could save Marco, or he could save strangers, not both. The maintenance stairs were exactly where he remembered, a narrow metal staircase behind a facade advertising boat tours. They scrambled down, metal clanging under their feet, emerged onto the lower dock level. 3 ferries sat moored here. 2 were already pulling away, crammed with people clinging to every available surface. The 3rd was loading, a ferry captain in a grey uniform trying to maintain order as people crowded the gangplank. "Full up!" the captain shouted. "That's all we can take. The boat's already overweight." Christopher pushed forward anyway. "We just need 2 more. We're small. We won't take up much space." "I said full!" The captain's hand went to his belt, where a gun sat in a holster. "Next boat's in 20 minutes." There wouldn't be a next boat. The fire was spreading, smoke thick enough to make breathing difficult above them. Part of the pier's roof collapsed with a roar of breaking timbers. "Get on," Marco said quietly. "We both go or neither goes." "Chris." Marco's hand tightened on his. "You came all this way. Get on the goddamn boat." The ferry captain looked between them, some kind of calculation happening behind his eyes. Finally, he jerked his head toward the gangplank. "Quick! And I mean quick!" They rushed aboard just as deckhands pulled up the gangplank. The ferry's engines revved, and it pulled away from the dock, wallowing low in the water from overcrowding. Behind them, Pier 39 groaned, and another section of roof collapsed. People who'd been standing there seconds before fell screaming into the flames. Christopher turned away and pressed his face against Marco's shoulder. They stood like that, as the ferry churned out into the bay, leaving San Francisco burning behind them. The crossing took 40 minutes. Sausalito should have been visible across the bay, its houseboats and marinas forming a colorful waterfront. Instead, smoke obscured everything. The ferry captain steered by GPS and nautical instinct, avoiding other boats that drifted unmanned through the chop. People on the ferry were crying, calling loved ones on spotty phone service, arguing about what was happening. Someone said terrorists, someone else said chemical weapons. A woman insisted it was God's judgment. Christopher knew it didn't matter. Whatever caused this, the result was the same. Civilization had failed in a single morning. Everything people took for granted, police, hospitals, government, basic infrastructure, had collapsed under a wave of mindless violence. And it was spreading. He looked at Marco, checking him over with a mechanic's attention to detail. "You're not bitten?" "No." Marco showed him his arms, his neck, anywhere skin was exposed. Couple burns from the fire, but no bites. "You?" "Same." Christopher felt the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. They were alive. Together for the moment, that was enough. The ferry docked at Sausalito with a jarring bump against the pier. People rushed off before the boat was properly secured, some jumping the gap to shore in their desperation to reach dry land. Christopher and Marco waited until the crush cleared, then disembarked carefully. Sausalito was chaos, but not yet collapsed. Police had set up barricades at the main intersections, were checking people for bites, turning away anyone who showed symptoms. National Guard trucks rolled past, soldiers in full gear, manning machine guns mounted in the beds, Bridgeway avenues closed. A cop shouted through a megaphone, "Emergency shelter at MLK Park, food and medical assistance available, proceed in an orderly fashion." Christopher and Marco followed the crowd, part of a river of refugees flowing north. Helicopters thundered overhead, military and news choppers circling like vultures. One newscopter got too close to a cloud of smoke and went down somewhere in the hills. A distant boom and a new plume of black rising MLK Park was a disaster. Thousands of people crammed into a space meant for hundreds, with more arriving every minute. Red Cross had set up tents, but they were overwhelmed, volunteers frantically trying to triage injuries while people screamed for help. A makeshift fence separated the bitten from the unbitten, and armed guardsmen watched the quarantine line with grim faces. "This won't hold," Marco said quietly. He was right. Christopher could see it happening in real time, the slow breakdown of order as resources ran out and panic set in. Already, fights were breaking out over food and water. People were trying to leave, but the guardsmen were turning them back, creating a pressure cooker situation that would explode. "We need to keep moving." Christopher scanned the park perimeter, looking for gaps in the fence. "North, maybe? Get out of the urban areas?" "My cousin lives in Petaluma," Marco said. "If we can get that far, maybe he'll take us in." Petaluma was 40 miles north, suburban sprawl giving way to farmland. It might not be overrun yet. And if they could get a vehicle? Christopher's attention caught on something across the park. A cable car sat on a flatbed truck being transported somewhere, not a working car. This one looked like a museum piece being relocated, old and restored. But it gave him an idea. "Can you drive stick?" he asked Marco. "Yeah, why?" Christopher pointed to the maintenance yard adjacent to the park. Several municipal vehicles sat parked there, including what looked like a water department truck. If they could steal one, they could use the service roads to bypass the blocked highways. "That's insane," Marco said. "You have a better idea." Marco looked around at the deteriorating situation in the park, then back at Christopher. "Okay, but if we get shot stealing a city truck during a declared emergency, I'm going to be really annoyed with you." They waited until dark, which came early under the smoke-choked sky. The guard presence had increased but was focused on the quarantine fence, where the bitten were becoming the infected and the fence was starting to fail. Gunfire erupted periodically as soldiers put down attackers. Christopher and Marco slipped away from the main crowd, working their way along the park's eastern edge. The maintenance yard was protected by a chain-link fence, but the lock was municipal standard, and Christopher had a master key set from his cable car days. Sometimes keys worked across departments. The third key turned the lock. They were inside the yard in seconds, moving between parked vehicles until they found the water department truck. It was a diesel F-350 with crew cab, four-wheel drive, and full tank according to the gauge. Keys were in the ignition. First piece of luck they'd had all day. Marco slid into the driver's seat while Christopher loaded their meager supplies. The engine turned over with a diesel clatter that seemed thunderously loud. Christopher held his breath, waiting for guards to come running. No one came. Everyone was focused on the park, on the fence failing, on the infected breaking through. Marco put the truck in gear, and they rolled toward the yard's service exit, speed bumps jarring them hard. The exit gate was locked, but the truck's bumper made short work of the chain. They burst through onto a side street, and Marco gunned it, heading north. Behind them, screaming intensified. The fence had failed. Christopher looked back through the truck's rear window and saw the mob surge, living and dead mixing together as the infection spread through the panicked crowd. "Don't look," Marco said. "Just don't." Christopher turned forward and watched Sausalito disappear in the side mirror, lit by flames and muzzle flashes. They drove north on Highway 101, the only route out of Sausalito that didn't require crossing the Golden Gate Bridge. The highway was clogged with abandoned cars, forcing them onto the shoulder and sometimes into oncoming lanes. Other vehicles tried the same maneuver, resulting in near collisions that left Christopher gripping the dashboard. At Mill Valley, they encountered their first roadblock. Military vehicles blocked all lanes, soldiers in full protective gear, checking vehicles. Christopher saw them pulling people out of cars, checking for bites, shooting anyone who showed symptoms. "Fuck this," Marco muttered, and jerked the wheel right, taking an exit ramp at 40 miles per hour. They skidded onto a surface street, headlights sweeping across residential neighborhoods that looked eerily normal. Porch lights on, cars in driveways, the appearance of normalcy shattered only by the columns of smoke visible against the night sky. They navigated by side streets and fire roads, Marco's hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Christopher watched for movement, for shambling figures or panicked civilians, but the suburbs seemed evacuated. Whether people had fled or were hiding inside, he couldn't tell. Somewhere near San Rafael, the truck ran out of gas. The gauge had been reading full, but apparently it was broken. The engine coughed twice and died, leaving them coasting into a darkened parking lot. "God damn it," Marco said without heat. He was too tired for real anger. They were parked behind a shopping center, surrounded by familiar chains, Target, Best Buy, PetSmart. The power was out, emergency lighting casting everything in a dim red glow. No people visible, no movement. "We should hole up for the night," Christopher said. "Moving around in the dark is stupid." Marco nodded agreement. They grabbed their supplies and approached the Target carefully. The front doors were smashed, glass scattered across the entrance. Inside, the store was dark except for emergency lights and the pale moonlight filtering through the skylights. "Hello?" Christopher called. His voice echoed through empty aisles. No response, no sound except a distant alarm beeping somewhere deep in the store. They moved through sporting goods, stepping over scattered merchandise. Someone had already raided the hunting section. Boxes of ammunition lay empty, rifle cases smashed open. But they found a few things the looters had missed: a compound bow, a dozen arrows, camping gear, including a portable stove, and freeze-dried food. Marco grabbed clothes from the men's section, replacing his ruined chef's uniform with jeans and a hoodie. Christopher did the same, shedding his blood-soaked work clothes for clean denim and a flannel shirt that fit reasonably well. They fortified the sporting goods department, using heavy display cases to block the aisles leading in. It wasn't much, but it would give them warning if anything approached. Christopher set up the camping stove and heated water for instant coffee. They'd found a box in an abandoned cart. "What the fuck happened?" Marco asked, wrapping his hands around the hot cup. "I mean, what actually happened? This can't be real." "It's real." Christopher had been thinking about this since watching Danny transform. Some kind of infection, spreads through bites, fast incubation. I saw someone turn in under 15 minutes. It destroys higher brain function but leaves the brainstem, keeps basic motor control and aggression. Like rabies. Worse than rabies. Rabies takes days or weeks. This is almost instant. Christopher sipped his coffee, the bitter heat grounding him. And the numbers? How many people got bitten this morning? How fast is it spreading? Marco was quiet for a moment. Then, your friend in the barn, the foreman, you had to kill him? He wasn't my friend anymore. That's the thing people don't get about zombie shit in movies. You can't hesitate when someone's infected. There's no cure, no waiting it out. They're gone, and they want to kill you. Zombie. Marco tested the word. That's what we're calling them? You got a better term? No. Marco set down his coffee. Chris, what are we going to do? We can't just wander around stealing trucks and hiding in targets. We survive. That's all we can do right now. But Christopher knew Marco was right. They needed a plan beyond immediate flight. Your cousin in Petaluma, you think he'd really take us in? Carlos. Yeah, probably. He's got a house, some land, keeps chickens and vegetables. Real homesteader type, always talking about self-sufficiency and preparing for disasters. Marco laughed, hollow. Guess he was right. How far from here? Maybe 20 miles, but we need a vehicle. Christopher thought about the parking lot full of abandoned cars. One of them probably had keys or could be hot-wired. His knowledge of cable car mechanics didn't translate directly to automotive work, but principles were principles. Ignition systems, electrical connections, mechanical linkages. It was all just machines. They took turns sleeping, 2-hour watches through the night. Christopher took first watch, sitting with his back against a display case, spanner wrench in his lap. The store remained quiet except for that distant beeping alarm and the occasional creak of the building settling. He thought about his apartment in the Tenderloin, probably looted or burned by now. Thought about his co-workers at the barn, wondered if any of them had survived. Thought about the thousands of people he'd seen die today, crushed or bitten or burned or shot. 12 hours ago he'd been drinking coffee and preparing to inspect cable car 17's brakes. Now he was a fugitive, hiding in a looted target, planning to steal a car and flee to farmland. The world had ended while he was checking grip mechanisms. Marco's watch passed without incident. They woke at first light, ate granola bars and warm water, then headed out to find transportation. The parking lot looked different in daylight, less menacing, more pathetic. Abandoned cars with doors left open, purses and phones scattered across asphalt, signs of panicked evacuation everywhere. Christopher started trying car doors systematically. Most were locked, but he found a Honda Civic with keys still in the ignition. The engine started on the first try. Too easy, Marco said, climbing into the passenger seat. He was right. Nothing had been easy since this started. But Christopher wasn't going to question luck. He backed out of the parking spot and headed for the exit. They saw their first zombie in 3 blocks, a woman in a business suit, dragging one leg behind her, shoulder clearly dislocated. She turned toward the sound of the engine and began shambling after them. Her mouth worked soundlessly, teeth clicking together. Christopher drove past her without slowing. In his rearview mirror, he watched her recede, still following, never stopping. San Rafael was worse than the suburbs. They passed through downtown and saw evidence of last night's collapse, burning buildings, bodies in the streets, abandoned military vehicles. A helicopter lay crushed in the middle of 4th Street, rotor blades embedded in the pavement. They took surface streets north, avoiding Highway 101, where smoke suggested major incidents. The neighborhoods here were residential, houses with yards and actual space between them. Some showed signs of fortification, windows boarded, cars blocking driveways. Others stood empty, doors hanging open, suggesting rapid evacuation. A few showed signs of active defense. Christopher spotted a house where someone had set up on the roof with a rifle, shooting zombies that approached. They waved as the Civic passed, but Christopher didn't stop. Trust no one was already becoming his default setting. Petaluma appeared gradually, the suburban sprawl giving way to the actual town center. Marco directed them through streets he remembered from childhood visits, toward his cousin's place on the eastern edge of town. There! Marco pointed to a house set back from the road, surrounded by chicken wire fence and vegetable gardens. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was home. Christopher parked at the curb and they approached cautiously. Before they reached the gate, a man appeared on the porch with a shotgun. That's far enough. The man was mid-30s, bearded, wearing work clothes. State your business. Carlos, it's Marco. Marco Oliveira, your cousin? The shotgun lowered slightly. Marco? From the city? Yeah. Listen, can we come in? It's bad out here. We've been driving all night. You been bitten? No, neither of us. We're clean. Carlos studied them for a long moment, then jerked his head toward the gate. Both of you strip down to your underwear. I need to see. They complied, standing in the street in their boxers while Carlos inspected them for bite marks or scratches. Satisfied, he let them dress and approach. You know what's happening? Carlos asked, leading them inside. Outbreak of something, Christopher said. Spreads through bites, turns people into, well, zombies is as good a word as any. Zombies? Carlos laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've been watching the news, what's left of it. Started in San Francisco, right? UCSF, we think. Some kind of lab accident. The house was small but well organized. Carlos lived alone, had turned his living room into a command center with multiple radios and a hand-crank generator. Maps covered one wall, marked with notes and colored pins. Power's been out since midnight, Carlos explained. Phones are down. Internet's gone. I've been listening to emergency broadcasts, but they're contradictory as hell. Military says stay inside. Government says evacuate to designated shelters. CDC isn't saying anything. The shelters are death traps, Marco said. We barely got out of Sausalito. They can't contain the infected, and once the fences fail, everyone dies. Yeah. Carlos poured them water from a filtered tank. I'm not going anywhere. Got 6 months of food, well water, solar panels for backup power. This house can be defended. Christopher looked around, evaluating with a mechanic's eye for structural integrity and defensive capability. Single story, solid construction, multiple exits. The chicken wire fence wouldn't stop determined attackers, but it would slow them down and provide warning. The gardens meant fresh food if they could protect them. You mind if we stay? Christopher asked. We can help fortify, pull our weight. Carlos studied him. You know how to handle a gun? I can learn. What about you, Marco? Same. Then you can stay. But we do this smart. Watches, rationing, defensive positions. This isn't a vacation. And if either of you gets bitten, we know. Christopher said. One bite, and we're done. They spent the rest of day one fortifying Carlos's house. Christopher applied his mechanical knowledge to improving the fence, adding tripwires and noisemakers that would alert them to approaching threats. Marco worked on food inventory, organizing the pantry and figuring out rationing schedules. Carlos reinforced doors and windows, showing them how to shoot and maintain his small arsenal. 2 shotguns, a hunting rifle, and 3 handguns. As evening approached, they gathered around Carlos's radio to listen to emergency broadcasts. The news was uniformly bad. San Francisco was lost. Military had cordoned off the entire city, shoot-on-sight orders for anyone trying to leave. Oakland was burning. East Bay was overrun. San Jose reported containment, but the broadcast sounded increasingly desperate. Sacramento was evacuating government officials to an undisclosed location. Los Angeles was implementing martial law. The infection was spreading south and east. Following highways and population centers, cities fell in hours. Rural areas lasted longer, but were being overrun by refugees. "How long until it reaches us?" Marco asked. Carlos checked his map. Petaluma's got maybe 50,000 people, give or take. We're far enough from major cities that we might have a week before the infected arrive in numbers, but refugees, they're already here. I've seen convoys passing all day, heading north towards Santa Rosa. "What happens when they run out of gas?" Christopher asked. No one answered. They all knew desperate people would start raiding homes, fighting over resources. The zombies might be mindless, but living people were often worse. That night, Christopher took first watch from the roof. Carlos had set up a lawn chair and a sleeping bag for whoever was on duty, along with binoculars and the hunting rifle. From here, he could see most of the neighborhood, houses dark or candlelit, a few showing signs of fortification, others already abandoned. Movement caught his eye. 2 streets over, a group of zombies shambled down the middle of the road, maybe 6 of them. They moved without coordination, spreading out to investigate any sound or movement. One stopped to attack a parked car, punching the window until the glass broke and his hands shredded. Christopher watched through binoculars, studying their behavior. They didn't seem to feel pain, didn't tire, just kept moving until something attracted their attention, then pursued it with single-minded intensity. A dog barked somewhere in the neighborhood. All 6 zombies turned toward the sound and began shambling in that direction. The barking got more frantic, then cut off suddenly. Christopher lowered the binoculars and stared at the stars, barely visible through the smoke haze. He thought about Marco sleeping inside, about the fragile safety they'd found here, about how long it could possibly last. 3 days passed. They settled into a routine. Watches, maintenance, careful trips to nearby houses for supplies. The neighborhood was emptying out as people fled north or huddled inside their homes. Zombies appeared in increasing numbers, drawn by noise or apparently just wandering randomly. On day 4, they made contact with neighbors. A family 3 houses down, the Hendersons, Carlos knew them vaguely, had been watching Christopher's supply runs. They approached cautiously, showing themselves unarmed, asking for help. Their daughter was sick, some kind of infection from a cut sustained while boarding up windows. They needed antibiotics. Carlos was reluctant. "We don't have much medical supplies. What if it's a trick?" "It's not a trick," Marco said. "They've got a kid. She's maybe 8 years old. We can't just let her die. We might need those antibiotics ourselves. Then we'll find more." Christopher backed Marco up. "We help people when we can. That's what keeps us human." They gave the Hendersons enough amoxicillin for a 10-day course, on the condition that the family would help with fortification and watches. The Hendersons agreed, and suddenly their defensive network expanded. More eyes, more hands, better security. Other neighbors noticed by day 6 they had an informal alliance of 5 houses, 15 people total. They pooled resources, set up a proper watch schedule, began thinking strategically about long-term survival. Christopher found himself in a leadership role he'd never sought. His cable car experience translated surprisingly well to crisis management, logistics, resource allocation, maintaining machinery under pressure. He organized supply runs, taught people basic mechanics for the generator and water filtration systems, planned defensive improvements. Marco handled the social side, mediating disputes, keeping morale up, making sure everyone ate and slept. His years as a pastry chef had taught him how to work long hours under pressure and keep a team functioning. Carlos provided the military perspective, defense in depth, fields of fire, supply redundancy. He'd never been in the actual military despite Christopher's initial impression, but he'd studied enough to know principles. Together, they made Petaluma's east side defensible. Then day 10 arrived and everything changed. The first sign was the refugees. Not the small groups they'd seen before, but masses, hundreds of people streaming south from Santa Rosa, carrying whatever they could, pursued by a horde of zombies that must have numbered in the thousands. "Jesus Christ," Carlos breathed, staring through binoculars from the roof. "The whole city must have fallen." Christopher looked north and saw the smoke. Santa Rosa was burning, pillars of black rising into the morning sky. The refugee columns stretched as far as he could see, a snake of desperate humanity fleeing the collapse. And behind them, the horde zombies moved faster in groups, something about the horde mentality making them more aggressive, more persistent. These weren't the scattered wanderers they'd dealt with before. This was a wave that would wash over everything in its path. "We can't stay here," Christopher said. "They'll overrun this whole area." "Where do we go?" Marco asked. It was Carlos who answered. "East, into the hills. There's an old ranch up in the Mayacamas, used to belong to my uncle. It's remote, off-grid, probably untouched." "How far?" 30 miles. We'd need vehicles, supplies, fuel." Christopher did the math. 15 people, limited vehicles, 30 miles of uncertain roads with a zombie horde approaching. "We need to move now, right now." The next 2 hours were controlled chaos. They loaded 3 vehicles, the Civic, Carlos's pickup, and a neighbor's SUV, with everything they could carry: food, water, weapons, tools, medical supplies. People argued about what to bring, what to leave. A woman wanted to bring her photo albums. A man insisted on his gun collection. Marco grabbed seeds from Carlos's garden, thinking ahead to farming. Christopher packed his mechanical tools and the spanner wrench that had saved his life on day 1. It felt important, a talisman from the world that was. They left Petaluma at 11 a.m. on day 10, 3 vehicles in convoy heading east on Adobe Road, toward the mountains behind them. The first wave of refugees was entering the town, and behind them, the horde. The ranch took 4 hours to reach, including 2 detours around blocked roads, and 1 terrifying encounter with a group of armed men who tried to hijack their convoy. Carlos shot one of them, and the others fled. No one talked about it afterward. The Mayacamas mountains rose steep and wooded, the road deteriorating into a dirt track that tested their vehicle's suspension. They climbed through oak groves and madrone forests, gaining elevation, leaving the chaos of the valley floor behind. The ranch appeared around a bend, a cluster of buildings in a meadow, surrounded by forest main house, barn, workshop, all constructed from local stone and timber. Solar panels on every roof, a creek running through the property, fences were intact, gates closed. "Welcome to the end of the world," Carlos said, killing his truck's engine. They set up fast. Knowing they had limited time before stragglers or refugees found them, Christopher organized teams. 1 for fortification, 1 for inventory, 1 for reconnaissance of the surrounding area. They'd brought 15 people, but lost 1 during the convoy, a teenager who'd been bitten during the hijacking attempt and had to be left behind when he turned 14 people to defend a remote ranch against whatever came next. The first week at the ranch was brutal. They worked from dawn to dusk, reinforcing fences, establishing watch posts, securing water sources. The creek was good, clean and flowing, but they needed filtration and storage. The solar panels provided electricity for essentials, but had to be rationed carefully. Food was tight. They'd brought maybe 2 months of supplies for 15 people, maybe 3 if they rationed strictly. Carlos's uncle had left some canned goods in the main house, but much of it was expired. They'd need to hunt, forage, garden. Long-term survival meant becoming self-sufficient. Christopher threw himself into mechanical work. The ranch had an old tractor that needed repair, a water pump that barely functioned, gates that didn't close properly. He spent hours in the workshop, hands black with grease, coaxing dead machinery back to life. Marco focused on food. He inventoried everything edible, planned meals, taught people how to cook over wood fire when they needed to conserve solar power. The seeds he'd grabbed became precious. They started a garden in a cleared section near the house, racing against the approaching winter. They saw zombies occasionally, individual wanderers who'd somehow made it into the mountains. The watch teams dealt with them quietly, using crossbows or suppressed firearms to avoid drawing more attention. Each body was burned in a pit away from the main compound, but the real threat came from other survivors. On day 20, a group of refugees found the ranch 8 people in 2 cars, ragged and desperate, begging for help. Christopher wanted to turn them away. They barely had enough for their own people, but Marco argued for mercy. "We were refugees once, remember?" They compromised. The newcomers could stay one night, could have a meal and medical attention for their injuries, but then they had to move on. The ranch couldn't support 22 people. The newcomers agreed. They ate gratefully, told stories about fleeing Napa when the city fell, thanked Christopher and the others for their kindness. Then they tried to kill everyone and take the ranch. The attack came at 2 a.m., during the watch change when they thought people would be least alert. But Christopher had suspected something. The newcomers were too interested in their defenses, too curious about where supplies were stored. He'd quietly warned the watch team to stay sharp. When the newcomers made their move, climbing out windows, grabbing weapons, heading for the sleeping quarters, Christopher was ready. He rang the alarm bell, and the ranch defenders responded exactly as they'd drilled. The fight lasted 10 minutes. 4 of the attackers died, shot by Carlos and other defenders. 3 surrendered. 1 managed to flee into the forest. They locked the survivors in the barn while they figured out what to do. The question sparked the first major argument since they'd arrived. "We have to let them go," Marco said. "We can't just execute prisoners." "They tried to murder us in our sleep," one of the neighbors countered. "They'd have killed children. We can't trust them." "So we kill them. That makes us murderers too. It makes us survivors." Christopher listened to both sides, feeling the weight of leadership. Carlos had deferred to him on this, waiting for his decision. Finally he spoke. "We give them supplies, enough food and water for 3 days. We keep their weapons. We escort them 5 miles from here and tell them if they come back, we shoot on sight." "That's a death sentence," Marco said. "So is letting them stay. So is letting them go with weapons and knowledge of our location." Christopher met his partner's eyes. "This is the world now. Every choice is terrible. We pick the least terrible option and live with it." They released the prisoners at dawn, stripped of weapons, but alive. Christopher watched them disappear into the forest and wondered if he'd just made a deadly enemy. Days 20 through 30 blurred together. They refined their defensive systems, improved their food production, learned to live with constant low-level fear. More refugees passed through the area, but word must have spread about the ranch's defenses because no one approached. Christopher spent his evenings on watch, staring at the stars and thinking about San Francisco. Was anyone still alive there? Had the military managed to contain the outbreak? Radio broadcasts had stopped on day 15, leaving them in information blackout. Marco joined him sometimes, sitting close, holding his hand in the darkness. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? The world had ended, they'd survived, and now they were just trying to keep surviving one day at a time. On day 30, Christopher was repairing the barn's roof when he heard engines, multiple vehicles, coming up the access road. He grabbed his radio. "Carlos, we've got company. Sounds like at least 3 vehicles, maybe more." "I see them." Carlos was on watch in the upper house. "Fuck, it's a lot of vehicles. 6 trucks, all modified with armor plating and gun mounts." Christopher's stomach dropped. This wasn't refugees. This was organized. The convoy stopped at the ranch's main gate. 30 men climbed out, all armed with military-grade weapons. One man stepped forward, middle-aged, confident, wearing tactical gear that looked expensive. "We're looking for supplies," he called out. "Fuel, food, ammunition. We're willing to trade." "We don't have enough to trade," Carlos shouted back. "Move along." "I don't think you understand. We're not asking." The man gestured, and his people fanned out, taking positions. "We've cleared this whole region. Every ranch, every farmhouse, every hiding spot. You can either deal with us peacefully, or we take what we want by force." Christopher's mind raced. They had 14 people against 30. The raiders had better weapons, better training, and no moral qualms about violence. Fighting would be suicide, but giving in meant slow death. The raiders would take everything, maybe kill them anyway to eliminate witnesses. "Give us a minute to discuss," Christopher called out. Inside the main house, they held a quick council. The mood was grim. "We can't win a fight," Carlos said flatly. "They'll massacre us." "So we give them everything and hope they leave us alive?" Marco's voice was bitter. "That's not going to happen." "We could run," someone suggested. "There's a back way through the forest. We could grab what we can carry." "They'd chase us down." Christopher shook his head. "These guys are organized, probably have tracking skills." "So what do we do?" Christopher looked around at the faces watching him. Neighbors who'd become friends, survivors who'd learned to trust each other. He thought about the cable car barn, about using his knowledge of machinery to survive, about the lever that controlled the grip, about the brake release that had saved him once before. "We use what we have," he said slowly. "We're mechanics. We know this property. We've spent weeks fortifying it. They're raiders who think they can intimidate us into surrendering." He explained his plan. It was desperate and stupid and would probably get them all killed, but doing nothing would definitely get them killed. They had nothing to lose. Christopher walked back outside and approached the gate. "Okay, you can come in, but slowly, no sudden moves. We'll trade fairly." The raider leader smiled. "Smart choice." They opened the gate. The raiders rolled their vehicles in, 6 trucks entering the compound. Christopher directed them to park in the yard between the barn and the main house, the area they'd spent weeks turning into a kill zone without anyone realizing it. Tripwires hidden in the grass. Pressure plates rigged to noisemakers, firing positions in every building, and under the barn, where Christopher had spent 3 days working in secret. The raiders climbed out of their trucks, weapons ready but not aimed. They were confident, relaxed. 30 armed men against 14 farmers. What could go wrong? Christopher raised his hand and dropped it. Carlos, positioned in the house, fired a single shot in the air. The alarm bell began ringing, and Christopher pulled the release lever. The barn floor was built over a natural sinkhole, the foundations shored up with wooden beams. Christopher had spent days weakening those beams, cutting strategic notches, rigging a release mechanism based on the same principles as a cable car brake. When he pulled the lever, the supports gave way all at once. The barn collapsed into the sinkhole, taking half the raider convoy with it. 3 trucks and maybe 12 men vanished into the earth, their screams cut off by tons of falling timber and stone. The remaining raiders spun, bringing weapons up, but the ranch defenders were already firing from prepared positions. Carlos with his rifle, Marco with a shotgun, the neighbors with an assortment of weapons, all aimed at targets pinned in an open kill zone. The firefight lasted maybe 30 seconds. Some raiders tried to fight back, others tried to flee. None of them made it out of the compound. When the shooting stopped, Christopher's ears were ringing and his hands shook. The yard was full of bodies, blood soaking into the dirt. Smoke rose from the collapsed barn, and from somewhere in the wreckage, someone was screaming. "One of the raiders trapped but not quite dead." "Jesus Christ," Marco whispered. "We did it." "Yeah." Christopher looked at the carnage and felt nothing. No horror, no guilt, just a vast emptiness where his emotions should be. "We did." They spent the rest of the day cleaning up. putting down the wounded raiders, stripping the bodies of useful gear, pulling supplies from the wreckage. 3 of the convoy trucks were intact and operational. They'd just tripled their vehicle count and acquired enough weapons and ammunition to hold off an army. The cost was Christopher's last connection to his previous life. The mechanic who'd spent 11 years maintaining cable cars, who'd been gentle and careful and thoughtful, was gone. In his place stood someone who could collapse a building on 12 human beings without hesitation. Marco found him that evening, sitting on the house's porch and staring at nothing. "You okay?" "No." Christopher didn't see the point in lying. "I'm not okay. I don't know if I'll ever be okay again. What you did saved us. You know that, right? If you hadn't figured out that trap—" "I know. Doesn't make it better." Christopher looked at his hands, still stained with grease and blood. "I keep thinking about Danny, about Ashley, about all the people I've killed since this started. And the worst part is, I'd do it again, every single one of them. I'd kill again to keep you safe." Marco sat down next to him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "That's what love looks like at the end of the world. It's not pretty, but it's real." They sat in silence as night fell, watching the forest's edge for threats that would inevitably come, because this wasn't over. The raider attack proved that. As resources dwindled and desperation grew, more groups would come looking for what the ranch had. They'd have to fight, again and again, until either the attackers stopped coming or the defenders ran out of ammunition. Christopher thought about the cable car system, about endless loops running beneath San Francisco's streets, about machinery that never stopped moving as long as someone maintained it. Survival was like that. You just kept moving, kept working, kept fighting, because stopping meant death. He didn't know if they'd make it through the winter, didn't know if the infection would eventually reach them despite their isolation, didn't know if they'd run out of food or ammunition, or simply the will to keep going. All he knew was that Marco was alive beside him, that they'd survived another day, and that tomorrow they'd wake up and do it all again. That had to be enough. In the distance, something screamed. Animal or human or something in between, it was impossible to tell anymore. Christopher reached for the rifle leaning against the porch railing, checked the magazine by touch, and settled in for another long night of watching the darkness. The cable was still pulling, dragging them forward through this new world. All he could do was hold on and hope they didn't fall off before they reached something resembling safety, if such a thing even existed anymore.